Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku's wings were revealed to All Might. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. A child knelt there, thin lips moving silently in a fast pace. His hands were clasped in front of him, slender fingers linked together. His head was bowed over his hands, green curls brushing against the back of the wooden pew. Around him, the candle's flames flickered and wavered, raising and dwindling in sync with his breathing. The shadows twisted and curled, stretching out as if shying away from his knelt figure. The sun casted in through the colored panes of glass lining the walls, casting his form in blotches of translucent hues, blues and pinks splashing across his freckles cheeks as the rest of his form was basked in strips of yellows, greens, and reds. The child unclasped his hands, raising to his feet. His eyes slipped open, their shade of green the color of grass soaking under the direct attention of the sun. Tiny flecks of gold encircled the blacks of his eyes, unnoticed unless you stared close enough. Footsteps sounded behind the child and he turned, watching the priest stroll down the aisle of benches. "Oh, a visitor. Are you here to pray, my child?" the elderly man asked, hands tucked together behind his back as he stopped at the child's row of wooden benches. It's rare to see someone so young come to ask for guidance. The child gave a soft smile, gaze tender as he approached the priest. No one is ever young enough to speak to him. The child spoke and the priest backed up, giving space for the child to leave the row. "Thank you. Have a wonderful day, Father." The child bowed his head low, turning on his heel. The priest watched him, hands coming up to rub at his narrowed eyes as the lights from the window panes seemed to focus down on the child like a spotlight. Bursts of light sparkled from his back, two small wings unfurling from his back. Their color was like stained glass painted shades of the earth, shimmering and glistening. They were small, probably only the length of the child's forearm, but glowed with the warmth of a kindling fire. Bells chimed with each light footfall of the child, singing a song of harmony as he slipped out of the church. Was I just blessed? The priest wondered aloud as he turned, staring at the marble statue placed on the back altar. Did you just grant me a meeting with an angel? Silence met the man's inquiry and he shook his head, looking down the row to see a single feather left on the wood of the pew bench. Stop, hey wait. Deku, a girl called out, rushing over to a small child with unruly green curls and hunched shoulders. Hey, Deku, freakin' I'll throw something at you. Yes? The child asked, looking up as he stopped walking. He pushed up his blocky, outdated glasses and staring curiously at the girl as she finally stopped in front of him, gasping for breath. You live near Bakugo-kun, right? The girl asked, tucking a lock of her aqua-colored hair behind her head. Can you give him this for me? She shoved a pink envelope out in front of her, gaze expectant. What's my name? The child asked instead of raising a hand to grab at the letter. The girl stared, face impassive. She huffed, rolling her eyes after studying him for a moment. Midoriya Izuku, she responded and he smiled, taking the letter. He was careful in tucking it into his book bag, patting it for effect. See, Izuku asked as he looked up at her. If you treat someone with respect, you get respect in turn. If you hadn't known my name, I wouldn't have taken the request. The girl huffed and crossed her spiked arms over her chest. You're a weird one, Deku. The girl snorted and turned, her hair nearly smacking Izuku in the face as she rushed back to her group of friends. Izuku pursed his lips out as he watched her go before turning back to continue walking home. As he walked, he flipped through his notebook, gentle as he leafed through the aged pages. HM, Izuku hummed to himself as he eyed the sketch of midnight. If her quirk is a sleeping agent, then why? The sewer lid popped off, slamming into the ground in front of Izuku. Izuku's mouth fell open as he turned slowly, a shadow descending over his form. You'll do nicely, the sludge villain cooed and slammed down into him. Midoriya Izuku had been 4 when he found out he was quirkless. He had been 4 when his hopes and dreams had been crushed into 1,000 pieces of burning hot embers. He'd been 4 when he realized that the wings resting on his mother's and his backs were in fact not due to a quirk. Mama, Izuku gave a sniffle, burrowed under a mountain of blankets and pillows. Why can't anyone else see our wings, besides Papa? Midoriya and Ko's wings were like stained glass window panes of a Catholic church hall, shimmering in the sunlight that sliced through the living room balcony's sliding door. When she moved, her feathers sang a song of wind chimes in the summer breeze. A touch to her wings would reveal a pulsating heat, like the beating heart of a dragon was bled into every single strand of every single feather. They stretched wide when they weren't tucked up against her back, a constant position they kept when she was inside. People never seemed to notice them or touch them, and more than once, Izuku had caught her wings phasing through someone's head when she's unfurled them. Inko smiled, dropping onto the couch beside the lump that had become her child. Izuku, unlike Inko, had tiny clumps of peach fuzz on his own back, resting between his shoulder blades. They looked like tiny weeds when compared to his mother's wings. Their colors clashed into ugly mixtures of dirt and sunlight. Well, Inko began as she leaned down, gently peeling the blankets back to see her son's red-faced, swollen expression. That's because they don't share my soul. Inko reached a hand out, brushing her hand through Izuku's hair. Izuku curled tighter into a small ball, his wings fluttering like leaves in a harsh wind. Inko giggled. Share your soul, Izuku whispered, tone empty of any usual joy or curiosity. Inko's giggles fell silent, her face saddening. She collected Izuku into her arms, drawing him to her lap. She hugged him, one of her hands ruffling through his tiny wings. Izuku squirmed, giggling at the tickling sensation. People who can see my wings. Inko began as she slowly leaned back, pinching Izuku's cheeks jokingly. Share a tiny piece of my soul. If they can see your wings, that means they have a tiny piece of your soul in them. You are bound to them for life. They are your precious people. Inko smiled as she patted Izuku's cheeks. Or your beloved enemies destined to constantly clash with you. So that's why Papa can see your wings, but Auntie next door can't. Izuku asked as he reached tiny hands up to grab at Inko's feathers over her shoulder. Inko hummed and unfurled her wings, the sounds of bells in the air encasing the family. That's correct, Inko smiled. Kind of like how Mitsuki can also see my wings. At the mention of his friend's mother, Izuku perked up. Kaken's mom can see your wings. Izuku gasped, eyes widening. Inko nodded, moving to stand up. She dropped Izuku back onto the couch and ruffled his hair. Yep, that's why we're such great friends. Inko smiled and Izuku tilted his head, thinking back to how his mother and Mitsuki always looked like they were arguing. Frowning at the supposed friendship, Izuku shrugged his shoulders. Must have been an adult thing. So don't worry, Izuku. Your precious people will come to you. Just be patient, dearie, Inko explained and bustled into the kitchen to make dinner. And they'll love you even without a quirk. Izuku laid on the couch cushion as he watched his mom move around the kitchen, mesmerized by her wings. His eyes slipped closed as the ringing of bells lulled him to sleep. A flash of green, the tight feel of pressure shoving against his chest. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. A glimpse of a small child, red eyes wide as he held a clump of bloody feather in a blistered fist. The endless retching stench of soiled waste, sewer water, and rotten food. A hymn sung low and shaking him to the core. Black, bell chimes, a brief glisten of gold. A gentle hand brushing through his hair. White, for I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. There was something tapping at his cheek. Hey kid, hey. Izuku shot up with a gasp, eyes wide as he turned to look at his savior. He stared. All might, and all his muscular, defined glory, crouched down next to him, body language conveying his nervousness and concern. Hey kid, you okay? All might, Izuku breathed out, pushing his bangs out of his face. His entire body smelt and he shuddered, remembering the sludge villain. You saved me. All Might was in front of him, actually in front of him, physically in front of him. If Izuku wanted to, he could reach out and touch those bulging arms that have saved countless lives. You're okay. All Might soothed and helped Izuku to his feet. His grip was firm and warm, something burning singing in Izuku's chest at the contact. I've trapped the villain. Do you need medical attention? Izuku blinked tears from his eyes, trying not to sniffle. He could smell himself, smell the residue from the sludge villain. He involuntarily shuddered, his wings ruffling out to get the sticky layer clinging to them off. I think I'm okay. Izuku wheezed out, eyes flashing down to his glasses. He gasped and scooped them up, shoving them onto his face before meeting All Might's gaze. Thank you for saving me. I think you should see a doctor, All Might argued, coughing slightly. Let's hurry. All Might patted his pant pockets, 2 soda bottles full of the villain. Oh no, I'm fine, Izuku tried to argue, only to falter when All Might sent him still with a stern gaze. Sir, kid, I don't have the time to argue. All Might spoke and coughed again. Izuku frowned, something in his chest clenching at the wet-sounding cough. Something deep inside him screamed and thrashed, hearing the pain in All Might's tone. What was wrong with him? So let's just go to the police station. I'm seriously fine. All Might, just go turn him in. Trust me, I'm okay. As if trying to prove it to the man, his small wings stretched out in a show of health. All Might chuckled, maybe finding his words funny. If you say so, young man. Tend to your wings. Though the world was crashing down around Izuku as All Might geared up to leave since they looked like they were coated pretty thickly in the slime. Wings? Izuku blurted before he could stop himself, and All Might paused from jumping, turning to study the child. You can see my wings. All Might turned to him fully, his smile faltered. Am I not supposed to? All Might asked, tone heavy with hesitance. His body looked like it was beginning to shrink, strangely enough, and that screaming part of him was growing more and more insistent. No, Izuku spoke, and his eyes glowed a ring of gold as his wings pulsated with heat, spreading out just the tiniest bit longer. All Might's eyes went wide as he watched the display, something in him cracking, clenching, and burning at the sight. You aren't. I have to go, All Might coughed out, backing away from the child. Something in his gaze was ancient, older than time itself. Those rings of gold broke apart, shattering back into those tiny flecks as the child blinked. Wait, no. Izuku shrieked and lunged just as All Might leapt. Izuku clung tightly to All Might's thigh, the wind screaming in his ears as his chest seemed to crack open and consume his body in a raging fire. His heart swelled at the physical contact with All Might, and something in his mind connected. "Oh Lord in heaven, no. Why All Might? Father, how dark your humor seemed. What the kid?" All Might yelped as he landed them on a building, eyes roaming to those wings. They rustled and fluttered, trying to neat themselves out from the trip. "Kid, you can't just..." Whatever All Might wanted to say was cut off by a glob of blood shoving past his lips, punctuated by the steam that encased his body. Izuku shrieked at the blood, his mind screaming at the obvious pain. His wings stretched out, feathers splaying against the breeze as Izuku stared at the skeletal man before him. Skin and bones. The man was literally skin and bones. Dark shadows circled his sickly flesh, his face tanned enough to outline his skull structure. His clothes hung off his body, revealing his protruding collarbone and making him look all the more fragile. This was All Might. Crap, was all the man could say. He wiped at the blood trailing down his chin, beady blue eyes unable to look away from those wings. They seemed to glow in the sunlight, little twinkling sparkles drifting around them. They looked otherworldly, but then again, Toshinori had seen weirder quirks. "Kid, I don't know why you're so worried about your quirk." Toshinori stopped, looking down at his pant pocket, noting how weightless his pockets felt. He groped at his empty pockets, paling. "God damn it, you shouldn't say his name in vain." Izuku blurted, unable to look away from the guy. All Might, that was All Might, but not All Might, but it was. But at the same time as he looked up at Izuku in disbelief. What's wrong? That villain. I lost him." Izuku's jaw dropped. "He must have fallen from my pocket. Oh Heavenly Father, I made you drop him." Izuku shrieked, covering his mouth with his hands. "This is my fault. All my fault. What if he..." Izuku's face shut down and he turned his head, just as an explosion went off. Toshinori whirled, eyeing the rising smoke cloud in exhaustion. "Stay here," Toshinori demanded, and quickly transformed again into All Might, disappearing with a powerful jump towards the direction of the smoke. Izuku's eyes gained a ring of gold as his pupils seemed to narrow into thin slits. "Kaken," he breathed out and his wings shuddered. Izuku burst down the stairs, intent on going after All Might. The bells were shrill as they rung at his heels, reminiscent of the large bell tower chimes. Toshinori leaned against the pole, looking at the destroyed strip as the sludge villain struggled with its newest hostage, a young boy with some sort of explosive quirk. Judging from the explosions he was setting off with his palms, he was putting up a good struggle, Toshinori noted. He was a fighter, not likely to give up. "Good. That could," Toshinori grunted, putting more weight against the pole as he clenched at his side. He'd used up too much time dealing with that child, too much time spent staring at those wings, feeling his entire body light up on fire from a single touch of the child. And he couldn't breathe, his knees nearly buckling as a heavy, suffocating pressure slammed into him. Toshinori couldn't stop the tiny trail of blood that slipped past his lips as the world around him seemed to darken. No one else seemed affected, too busy focusing on the heroes trying to save the teenager. But Toshinori felt it, saw it. It was like black and kindness was overtaking his vision around the edges, filtering what he saw. Gray, grainy particles were sprinkling through the air. Then suddenly, a burst of light. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. It felt like a hand was squeezing around his throat, gradually tightening as the seconds passed. His vision was spotting, his heart hammering in his chest as he clawed and used his quirk against the slime slowly pushing into him. His eyes rolled towards the back of his skull as more slime shoved down his throat, his tongue dying slowly from the taste of sewage and muck, until Katsuki's thoughts were snapped-taut, feeling a warmth bubbling up. He heard the sludge villain give a confused trill in his throat. His mouth was released and he coughed and spat, vomit shoving the residual slime out of his body. And then he saw him hauling ass towards him, face twisted in a vicious snarl. Katsuki felt his lung constrict for an entirely different reason as he saw those gold-ringed eyes lock in on his and those four ghost-like wings flicker into existence for a brief blink before disappearing again. Izuku slammed into the sludge villain, hands clawing and punching against the slime holding Katsuki. Izuku's eyes stayed on Katsuki's and his eyes burned, tears trickling down his purple cheeks as Izuku bared his teeth. "You do not touch what is mine." Izuku spat and All Might was suddenly there, punched the villain off him. Katsuki was weightless, breathless, and dizzy as Izuku wrapped his arms around him, hugging him to his chest. Katsuki's eyelids fluttered as the world sunk around him, seeing those two chiming wings lift up as if ready to take flight. "Shitty Deku," Katsuki choked out, his lungs burning. Izuku hugged him close, eyes losing their ring of gold as his pupils went back to those full circle. "Rest," Izuku whispered, and Katsuki's eyes rolled as he heard the beginning of a hymn hit his ears. "What do you mean he doesn't have a quirk?" Katsuki snapped out, glaring at his friend. "Of course Deku does. He has his." "Bakugo-kun." The teacher stepped in, frown in place as Izuku just continued to eat his lunch. It's not nice to lie. Midoriya-kun sadly doesn't have a quirk. You don't have to lie for him. Katsuki stared at the woman as if she was stupid, his eyes moving to those tiny little mounds of green, brown, and yellow peach fuzz poking out of his back. But Bathishu's wings, Katsuki stuttered out, confusion hitting hard as his teacher frowned at him. What wings, Bakugo-kun? Katsuki saw Izuku deflate, saw those green eyes grow murky, saw those tiny little wings seem to droop. No one saw them. No one saw his wings. Izuku met eyes with Katsuki and he shook his head, mouth pressed in a sad smile. Katsuki heard those bells chime in his ears as he exploded the desk in a fit of rage, his shrieks attempting to drown out the soft tinkling. Katsuki came to a moment later just in time to see All Might part the clouds with a single punch. His body didn't feel exhausted, his lungs normal compared to their constricted burning not minutes before. His jaw didn't throb from the bruising grip the villain had on it, keeping it pried open to better jam down his throat. Katsuki shoved himself away from Izuku, seeing those wings flutter in agitation. Their color were darker, looking like grass in the shadow of a cloud rather than in direct sunlight. Katsuki snarled low in his throat, grabbing at Izuku's collar. Don't fucking do that, Katsuki hissed low as heroes rushed to the two of them. Don't you fucking do that freaky shit with me again, shitty Deku. Izuku's wings drooped down at Katsuki's scathing tone and Katsuki's face scrunched up, looking like he was about to vomit again. Are you two alright? Katsuki turned away from Izuku as the heroes began fussing over them, chiding Izuku over interfering. Katsuki watched out the corner of his eye as Izuku kept his head down, hiding those gold-flecked eyes away from everyone. All too soon they were free to leave and Katsuki and Izuku walked home in silence. Kaken, they got bigger, Katsuki cut him off, back turned as he walked ahead of the green-haired child. They look longer. You must be imagining it, Izuku responded as he glanced up at Katsuki's tense shoulders. Are you in any pain? Katsuki whirled, stomping up to him. Izuku squeaked as Katsuki grabbed him by the collar, snarling in his face. No, I'm fucking not because you fucking stole it, you piece of shit. Katsuki released him and backed up as if burned, shoving his hands into his pockets. Stop following me. Izuku stood there as Katsuki stormed off, his wings furling up against his back tightly. You two don't seem very friendly. All Might spoke as he popped up around a corner. Izuku yelped, windmilling his arms back as he tried to regain his balance. You alright? I am. I should be asking you that. Izuku stuttered out as smoke exploded, cloaking All Might until he was Toshinori once more. Izuku looked around, complexion pale as he searched for any onlookers. I am so sorry for causing everything. It was not all right, Toshinori agreed, but in the end, it was settled. Tell me, what exactly is your quirk? I don't know. Izuku blinked before giving a startled bark of laughter. He shook his head, his wings beating once as if humored by his question. I don't have a quirk, Izuku spoke finally. I'm quirkless. Toshinori's eyes slid back to those wings, noting their darker shade. He spoke, not convinced in the slightest. My boy, I'd believe that if you didn't have wings growing out of your back. Izuku's smile fell and he fiddled with his fingers. Not everyone can see my wings, Izuku admitted softly. If you asked anyone at the moment if they could see my wings, they'd answer no. You being able to see my wings, that's important. Izuku closed his eyes, breathing in loudly. Please, come touch my wings. Kid, please, Izuku pleaded and turned around, stretching his wings out as he ducked his head. He shuddered as he heard those dragging footsteps grow closer. A tentative poke at his feathers sent electric shocks through his entire body as images crashed into him. Izuku's eyes shot open wide, gold swallowing the green as he wheezed. A burning light, warm and glowing, passed along through years and lives. A woman's beaming smile. Blood, blue, yellow, white, and red blinding his eyes until it was all he knew. A ringing chuckle, chasing away fear and darkness and only summoning light. What was that? Toshinori wheezed as he stumbled back, expression dazed. Izuku turned to him, clasping his hands together as if to pray. The gold shrunk back into those thin rings. His pupils narrowed as his wings curled up against his back. That, Izuku spoke, and those rings of gold were trying to entrap Toshinori with their burning intensity, was me sharing with you my soul. Toshinori stared at him for a moment, mouth hanging open. His mind chased away the last of the dizzy, cluttered images, unable to make sense of any of the scenes he was presented with. What? Toshinori found his voice and Izuku gave a nervous smile. His gaze wavered, his pupils shrinking before almost engulfing the gold. Almost drunkenness came over the child, his eyes glossy and gleaming as if he'd been shown the secrets to the world. My mother can explain better than I can. Izuku spoke, voice empty of any emotions. He dropped his hands, wings drooping. I am not lying when I saw I am quirkless, Yagi Toshinori. What? Toshinori's steps came to a halt as Izuku walked back him, bells ringing in the air as they passed. You saw the memories, right? When you touched my wings, Izuku clarified, continuing to walk. And Toshinori hesitated, nodded. I saw your memories. That cemented on connection as soulmates. Toshinori coughed up blood as he stumbled after the child, enraptured by the sunlight seeping through those almost transparent wings. For a split second, he could have sworn he saw 4 other wings settle against the child's back like a cape. As soulmates, Toshinori called as he fell into step with the child, warmth radiating from the boy. Like I said, my mother can explain, Izuku spoke emptily. Let's go. Toshinori was left lost as he stumbled next the child, eyes somehow always drawing back to those wings. It was only when they got to the child's apartment did he realize his side didn't throb as painfully. They used to start off as soft singing, gentle caresses to his cheeks or hair, and endless warmth. He was never able to recall the details, only remembering that soft voice, the warmth, the stretching voids of white and gold. He'd wake up in tears, gasping for air as he longed for something he no longer could recall. He'd struggle to wake up, lost to the memories he only kept in his dreams. They used to start off as soft singing, gentle caresses to his cheeks or hair, and endless warmth. They slowly died to raging pain, cracked open rib cages and shredded hearts, unbearable pain in his back. 6 times over as darkness dyed his flesh like watery puddles. After Katsuki burned him the first time with his quirk, his dreams stopped altogether. There was a heavy tension in the air as Izuku settled next to Inko, basking in the warmth her wings emitted. He leaned into her side as Toshinori sipped awkwardly at his tea. You can see his wings, Inko repeated, face carefully blank. You touched them. Toshinori nodded, setting his tea down. It is hard to explain, to one who won't believe. Those images I saw. Toshinori cut off, closing his eyes at the images flashed across his darkened eyelids. Blinding sunlight, a warmth that was unlike anything Toshinori had ever experienced. Endless love and comfort. No pain, no fear, no exhaustion. Beautiful wings, 6 of them, stretched out to encompass the sky like a loving hug. What were they exactly? He said they were his soul. A fragment. Yes, Inko confirmed, sipped on her own tea. The blood that runs through my blood. And in turn Izuku's is old and timeless. But only those who share a piece of our souls sees our wings. Toshinori jerked, looking for a glimpse of her wings. Inko smiled despite the mood. You can't see them. You don't share a fragment of my soul. What? Toshinori licked his lips, feeling like he already knew the answer. He didn't know how, but he knew. What are you, exactly? People have called us many names throughout history, Inko explained softly. I believe the most popular one is Angel. Angel. Toshinori released an exhale and blinked. An angel. You were rather open about sharing this information. Inko giggled and it sounded pleasant enough. You can see my son's wings, Inko stated simply. Why would I hide anything from you? It's not as if you truly believe us anyways. Toshinori shifted in his seat, feeling spread bare at how easily she read him. Your son said he was quirkless. Toshinori coughed, trying to catch the blood before it dribbled. He withdrew his hand, startled by the lack of blood. Yes, Inko spoke, looking at him curiously. Is something the matter? Toshinori looked up from his hand, other hand moving to touch his side. I am not in the best health, Toshinori admitted. Thank God Izuku had kept silent about him being All Might. Sometimes I cough up blood. All Might rubbed at his side, a perplexed expression on his face. But, you feel no pain and aren't coughing up blood. Inko guessed, eyes sliding to her son. Izuku, did you? He was in pain. Izuku spoke in a quiet, uncertain voice, his eyes glowing that eerie gold again. There was no green to be seen, just endless gold. It hurt to feel his pain. Toshinori choked, looking startled. Feel my pain. Toshinori wheezed out and those gold eyes settled on him. Suddenly Toshinori couldn't breathe, feeling the age of those burning orbs brand into him. They were tearing him up, picking him apart, putting him back together, and for the first time in years, he inhaled deep and didn't feel that stabbing twinge in his lungs. What did you do? Angels are miracle workers, as the humans like to tell it. Izuku spoke lightly, his voice not his own. Toshinori seized in his chair, Inko giving a resigned sigh as Izuku's wings stretched out. I cannot have my precious person die within the year after finally meeting you. I healed you. You healed me. It came out without any emotions, just a blunt statement as his mind crashed and burned. You healed me. I'm missing half my stomach. Toshinori ripped his shirt up, only to gasp along with Inko when smooth skin stretched across where the scar was supposed to be. Toshinori just stared. It'll take a while for your body to process the changes, Izuku spoke, his eyes wide as Toshinori's shirt fell from his numb hand. But, on the plus side, you aren't dying anymore. What did you do? Toshinori whispered, body seeming to sag. What did you do? There was a bone-deep weariness in his tone as he gingerly touched his healed side. His hands were trembling, everyone crystal clear and jumbled at the same time as he tried to understand just what was going on. Saved you, Izuku responded just as quiet. Why do you sound so sad? Toshinori leaned forward, planting his elbows on his knees as he wheezed out a long exhale. He rested his forehead against his laced fingers, staring at the wooden floorboards. I resigned to my death years ago, Toshinori explained, words choked as he blinked, his vision clear. I had prepared myself for my end. I had my plan, my motivation to find a successor for my legacy. I had been told there was no help, no Deus Ex Machina to save me. But you, Toshinori's chest heaved, you just bluntly state you healed me. I don't know why. Yagi-san, you can see my wings, Izuku spoke as he slid from the couch, kneeling down in front of Toshinori. Blue met watery green, and Toshinori blinked as he saw those wings raise as it to encircle them. That means that you are supposed to be in my life. That means that we're tied together by something that was decided before the two of us were even born. I protect my precious people, Yagi-san. I couldn't stand the pain you were suffering. You felt it? Toshinori asked, hands dropped. Izuku nodded and he plucked one of his feather, holding it out to Toshinori. What's this? If you decide you do not want my gift. Izuku spoke with a stuttered breath, then just wish it. The feather will take my grace from you. Toshinori's head was spinning, everything too much. He looked between the feather to the child, back to the feather. Toshinori gingerly plucked the feather from his fingers, holding it gently to his chest. Thank you. I'll heat up more tea, Inko spoke after a moment of watching the two. She stood up and left, leaving them in the living room. You're looking for a successor, Izuku whispered softly, eyes squinting as he tried to stop the tears from forming. For your quirk, Toshinori nodded slowly, exhaustion crashing into him. Yes, because my time was running out fast. I feared leaving this world without the proper protection to ensure that the light always prevailed. Izuku smiled softly up at him, still knelt down in front of him. Toshinori cleared his throat and Izuku seemed to understand his discomfort. He stood, his wings stretching out. Well, it looks like you have a bit more time to decide your successor then. Izuku spoke with a kind, open smile. You're quirkless, Toshinori breathed out. With those things, it's hard to believe. Izuku gave a shy laugh, wings tucking back up. Have you ever thought of doing anything with them? I can't really do anything with them, Izuku confessed. And with me being quirkless, it means I'm basically unable to be a hero. Toshinori raised an eyebrow as Inko came back in with new tea. You want to be a hero? Toshinori questioned in alarm. Izuku nodded, suddenly looking embarrassed. I've always looked up to you. Before they told me I was quirkless, I was adamant about being a hero, Izuku confessed with a sheep smile. But my angelic traits are basically useless to everyone but my soulmates, so. Izuku shrugged as he moved to get his cup. Toshinori was stupid. He was stupid and impulsive and always listened to his heart before anything else, and it was all but screeching at the moment. May I? Toshinori coughed more on reflex than anything else. May I come by again tomorrow? Inko and Izuku shared curious looks before Izuku nodded. Why? Inko inquired. The air around her reminding Toshinori of her son when his eyes glowed gold. She didn't look any different though. The feather in his hold heated up slightly. I believe I figured out why I'm connected to Midoriya-kun, Toshinori explained, feeling light for the first time in years. So, Izuku spoke up shyly, adjusting his glasses. Why are we here? Izuku looked around the litter-riddled beach, eyes darkening as he looked at all the trash. Being a hero isn't just about saving lives, Toshinori spoke as he cleared his throat. It's also about doing the minimal tasks no one else wants to do. Like cleaning this beach. Izuku's eyes sparkled with life as he turned to Toshinori with a smile. We're going to clean the beach. I've tried a few times myself, but it seemed like every time I put a dent in the mess, it was just filled back up the next morning. Izuku breathed out, wings positively humming as his feathers stretched out. You've tried to clean this up before? Toshinori asked slowly, eyeing the child's lean frame. Dressed in a short-sleeve shirt and sweatpants, the child looked like a wet noodle. Multiple times. The earth is his greatest creation, Izuku spoke softly. Besides humans, of course, I will do all I can in my power to preserve his precious creations. Toshinori shifted his footing, nodding slowly. I see, was all he said. Izuku stretched his arms out, wings copying the movements. The air was filled with the tinkling of bells as the sun filtered through his transparent, glass-like wings. That's still amazing. Izuku gave a sheep smile, eyes moving to stare at a broken-down washing machine. It takes a while to believe, doesn't it? Before I found out I was quirkless, I thought these were my quirk. Really? Toshinori asked as Izuku bent down and grabbed an empty bottle. Izuku hummed, shifting through the sand as he grabbed a trash bag. Yep, I never realized that our wings were something otherworldly. Izuku chuckled softly as he grabbed another bottle, gently placing it in the trash bag. But my dreams helped me understand. I can share my memories with you again, if you'd like. Izuku looked up to Toshinori, who shook his head. I am slowly coming to terms with what you say you are, Toshinori spoke cautiously. He sighed. I have your feather. Izuku smiled softly at him. I am keeping it in a safe place as my thoughts sort them out. If I will away your grace, was it? Do I lose the ability to see your wings? Izuku stared at him silently, expression unreadable. He turned back to the trash, sand sifting through his fingers as he grabbed a broken bottle. If you will it, it will happen. God created man with free will. Not even us angels can oppose his powers. Izuku spoke seriously. Toshinori nodded, frowning. That gave him more questions than any answer he was looking for. So, how are we going to move the heavy stuff? You'll have to figure it out. Toshinori spoke as he unfolded a small chair, plopping down. This is training, kid. Izuku gaped at him. Well, what? But this stuff has to weigh like tons. Izuku stuttered out as he collected some crumpled paper wrappers. He tossed them into another trash bag, and with a jolt, Toshinori realized he was separating the trash by material. Aren't angels supposed to be strong? Warriors, or whatever it says in the Bible? Toshinori asked, unfamiliar with the religion. Can't you just use your angelic powers or whatever to lift the heavy stuff? Izuku gave a startled bark of laughter, dropping the broken CD in his hand. I wish, sadly, were watered-down seraphims compared to the amazing ones mentioned in texts of him. Izuku gave a bright giggle as he placed a broken plank of wood in a pile with other pieces of wood. I do not have otherworldly strength, and my grace cannot work as you believe. Honestly, outside of my soulmates, I am basically a normal human. Aside from my eyes, of course. Your eyes? Toshinori asked gently as he watched Izuku work, taking in how delicate he was with the rubbish. Izuku raised a hand, pointing to his glasses. You probably noticed, but my eyes glow gold, right? Toshinori nodded and Izuku hummed. Unlike my mother, I'm currently unable to suppress my grace from my eyes. This is basically a clear sign that I'm not fully human. My mother's eyes looks normal to you, right? She's able to conceal her grace inside her body without effort. Me, not so much. Oh, Toshinori blinked. I don't really understand, but okay. Izuku gave another laugh and fell silent as he concentrated on cleaning up. Why are you wanting me to be your successor? Just because we're connected doesn't mean that automatically I'm supposed to take up your mantle. Izuku spoke an hour later, sweat trickling down his face. He'd shed his shirt, his wings contrasting against his flesh. Toshinori couldn't help but stare, taking in how they seemed to grow out of his shoulder blades like roots, always phasing through his shirts to appear against his skin. I don't know if I can be a hero. I'm getting old, my boy, Toshinori sighed out. I think it's time to pass on the mantle. I like to think that this was meant to be, you becoming the next holder of one for all. You're quirkless, wings notwithstanding. You wasted no time in hurrying to save that child, and you've already shown your heart is in the right place. Toshinori swept a hand out to the cleaner little circle Izuku had made. You have all the makings of a hero. You're a literal angel. If that isn't the criteria for a hero, I don't know what is. Kaken was being attacked. Izuku justified seriously, and there was something heavy in his tone. Toshinori blinked, rubbing at his eyes when he saw a flash of black in those green eyes. No one is allowed to hurt my soulmates. Toshinori's jaw worked open. That child could also see. Toshinori gestured to Izuku's wings and Izuku turned, picking up a smashed cardboard box. Yeah, Izuku spoke and his tone told Toshinori all he needed to know. He didn't bring it up further. Toshinori settled back in his seat as Izuku went back to cleaning, the silence filled with his soft singing. Holy, Izuku sung quietly as he hefted up a busted microwave, placing it on the back of the truck Toshinori had rented. Holy, holy, Lord, God Almighty. Toshinori watched as his wings seemed to quiver to the somber tone, his eyes half-lidded as he tossed another can into the bag. Early in the morning, our song shall rise to thee. Do you think he's real? Toshinori asked, and Izuku looked over to him. He gave a soft, open smile, words unable to properly convey what he wanted to say in answer. There are many mysteries in this world, Yagi-san. Izuku spoke, grunting as he picked up another microwave. We can't have all the answers. It was only once that he had the dream. The chants of holy echoed, etching into his skin, into his bones. A glimpse of gold, twisted from bones and veins and clouds into a throne. Blinding warmth, burning into him. A gentle caress to his head, a press of lips to his skin. A whisper against his head, a ringing voice that shuddered his heart and broke his soul over and over again in eternal love. Praise the Lord, you his angels, you mighty ones who do his bidding, who obey his word. He'd awoken to screaming, belated in realizing it was his own hoarse voice calling to the heavens. His mother was cradling him to her chest, shushing him as her wings wrapped around them like a blanket. It's okay, she whispered as she wiped at his tears. It's okay, sweetie. It won't happen again. It won't happen again. Izuku didn't ask her how she'd know that. But true to her words, he never have the dream again. It didn't stop him from hearing those ghostly whispers of holy when he daydreamed. It didn't stop him from dreaming of those fleeting images of tender touches and indescribable love. It didn't really stop. Hey shitty Deku, Katsuki snarled as he planted a foot firmly on the wall, trapping Izuku. Izuku peered up at him, eyes obscured by his glasses. The fuck this I hear about you trying to go into UA. You're fucking quirkless. I mean, if you think about it, my eyes. An explosion set off beside his head and Izuku clamped his mouth shut, staring straight into Katsuki's molten gaze. Don't, Katsuki gritted out. Finish that fucking sentence. I was right, they have gotten bigger. Who the fuck is it? Katsuki leaned closer and Izuku stayed unblinking, face impassive. I don't have to tell you anything, Kaken, Izuku whispered, voice holding the barest of wavers. This close, he could feel the hurt coiling off his childhood friend in waves. His heart clenched, wishing to ease Katsuki's suffering. Why do you even care? What are you trying to play at? Katsuki hissed low in his ear, hands planting on Izuku's shoulders. Steam coiled in the air and Izuku stayed still. Why the sudden decision to be a hero? What, has your new friend talked you into it? Replacing the hurt was anger, pure anger. Izuku raised a hand, touching Katsuki's wrist. Katsuki growled and threw his hands off Izuku, knocking his grip off him. Stop while you're ahead, Deku. I'm the only one from this school who's going to UA. Got it. Learn your place, you quirkless freak. Katsuki pivoted on his heel and stomped off, hands shoved into his pockets. Izuku exhaled and slid down, tilting his head back as he tried to calm his thundering heart. Izuku closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of his feather pulse as it hung around Katsuki's neck like a charm. He smiled softly to himself, pretending his shoulders didn't throb and burn. His legs weren't shaking, and his wings didn't ache like broken bones healed wrong. You haven't willed my grace away, Izuku commented one morning as Toshinori greeted him with steaming styrofoam cups of tea and donuts. He grunted, knees knocking together as he slammed a washing machine onto the back of the truck. I am still debating on what to do with your gift. Toshinori spoke slowly, trying to articulate his thoughts. I need more time. Take all the time you need, Izuku smiled. I will not rush you and I wish for you to not rush yourself. Izuku exhaled as he tossed a microwave into the back of the truck. Yagi-san, where do these go? I donate them to local businesses who can use the scrap metal, Toshinori responded, and Izuku made a curious noise in his throat. Are you sure you want to give me your quirk? Izuku asked softly. Toshinori raised an eyebrow. Yagi-san, I might fear that if the time comes, I cannot hold up to your expectations. You're doing fine, Toshinori soothed. I believe in you. Izuku nodded up from a glass bottle, his wings drooping down with his mood. Thank you, Izuku whispered and fell silent. It was 2 weeks before the entrance exam that they met. He's been walking down the street, grocery bags hooked against the crook of his elbow as he mentally sung to himself. You should really apologize. A voice spoke and electricity shot down Izuku's spine as he turned. A teenager, looking like the same age as himself, was standing up to 3 older adults. They looked pretty intimidating, towering over him. His back was facing a smaller girl, who was clinging to the teen like a lifeline. You were the ones who bumped into her after all. Izuku just stared, taking in the teen's wild purple hair and dead-looking eyes. Something was tugging at his chest, his heart swelling as he continued to stare. Huh? One of the men snarled as he leaned into the teen's personal space. Wanna repeat that? Yeah, if anything, that little miss gotta apologize to us. Man number 2. You apologize. Man number 3. The teen tilted his head up, back straight as he smirked. He opened his mouth. Leave us alone. The teen spoke and the 3 men stiffened. They swayed awkwardly before tittering around and away, eyes blank. The girl gasped while Izuku's eyes brightened. That was so cool, Izuku blurted out as he made his way over. His wings fluttered wildly behind him. Is that your quirk? Manipulation? Mind control? The girl scooted back, looking at the teen warily. The teen sighed as she bowed and rushed off, leaving Izuku and him alone. Go away, the teen ordered, and the words sunk into Izuku's mind like fairy dust. A heavy dong of a bell echoed throughout the air and the teen jolted when Izuku's eyes flashed gold. What's your quirk? How does it activate? Oh, I'm so sorry, where are my manners? Go away, the teen demanded more firmly, eyebrows pinching when Izuku's head just tilted. Oh, are you trying to use your quirk on me right now? Izuku asked, eyes sparkling. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you can't. Hue quirk nullification. The teen warily shifted back and Izuku gave a joyful laugh, his heart swelling as his wings chimed. The teen's eyes shot to his wings and his face scrunched up in alarmed confusion. Oh no, I'm quirkless, Izuku waved flippantly and beamed when the teen choked on air. I'm Midoriya Izuku. That was an amazing quirk. What's it called? How do you activate it? The teen reeled back as Izuku seemed to materialize a small pocket notepad into his hands. What quirkless? But, your wings. The teen fell silent as Izuku's eyes seemed to glow gold for a second. You can see my wings? Izuku asked, suddenly realizing why his chest was swelling so much. You can see my wings. The teen eyed Izuku with an unreadable expression on his face, body tensing. He didn't like what was happening. Not one bit. I'm just going Togo. The teen spoke and tried to make an escape. Izuku stood there for a second as the teen scurried down the sidewalk. Wait, Izuku called as he hurried after the teen. What's your name? The teen nearly tripped as he tossed his name over his shoulder. Shinsu Hitoshi. Izuku came to a halt as Shinsu disappeared around a corner. Izuku's wings pulsed and grew just the tiniest bit more, humming happily as church bells deafened the air. Your wings have gotten longer, Inko commented as she set another serving of rice down in front of Izuku. He looked up, chopsticks bit between his teeth. You think? Izuku asked and looked over his shoulder, staring at the subject of their conversation. I couldn't really tell, Inko hummed, settling down across from him. They do. Congratulations, Izuku. Will I be able to meet your newest soulmate? Inko beamed happily and Izuku flushed. I scared him away, Izuku admitted softly. Inko stared at him for a moment before bursting out laughing. Oh, don't worry. You aren't the first angel to scare a human away. Inko giggled into her bowl of miso soup. Moo! Izuku groaned loudly. Katsuki stared at those damned wings, eyes narrowing. They looked longer. Again, a growl ripped through his throat at the realization, hands sparking. He'd met someone else. He'd met with someone else who probably fawned over him like he was a fucking saint. Katsuki watched as Izuku shuffled up to their teacher, talking in low tones and fiddling with his homework. The teacher just sighed and shook his head before accepting the papers. Izuku's wings sang a song of sorrow as he passed by Katsuki. You can do it, young man. Toshinori cheered as Izuku smoothed out the wrinkles in his shirt. Izuku stared up nervously at him, gnawing at his bottom lip. You think I can? Izuku asked and Toshinori nodded. I really do, Toshinori promised and eyed Izuku's wings. Is it just me or have your wings? They're grown, Izuku confirmed and his nervousness broke under the weight of his sudden sad smile. I met someone who could see them, but he ran away. Ran away? Toshinori questioned warily as Izuku nodded, stretching out his arms. He'd just finished cleaning up the beach, the two stopping for a talk before Izuku had to go home and wash up for the entrance exam. I think I scared him, Izuku guessed. His quirk didn't work on me, so I think that made him very uncomfortable. Add my wings that have nothing to do with a quirk and, well, Izuku tugged on a green curl. I think I scared him. Toshinori sighed, shaking his head. He checked his watch, only to nearly sputter in alarm. My boy, we have to hurry or you won't have time for your exam. What? Izuku squeaked out, scrambling. Oh no. Izuku scurried over to his abandoned shoes, plopping down to tug them on. Wait, the quirk. Toshinori chased after Izuku, whose head snapped up in alarm. Oh Heavenly Father guiding us, I completely forgot. Izuku gasped out, skin pale as he clambered up onto his feet. I am so sorry. We're both out of our element, Toshinori chuckled, holding a hand up. Wait, my boy. I need to pass on my quirk to you. Izuku froze, body stiffening like he'd been turned into stone. I feel like I'm cheating, Izuku whispered as Toshinori tilted his head to the side. Here I am, having you help me with this. Izuku looked up to his hero. Doesn't it feel unfair that you are pushing me to do this? Do you think you're cheating? Toshinori spoke and touched Izuku's shoulder. Look around us. Izuku did so, taking in the clear beach. The rising sun's rays shimmered off the calm ocean, spreading lights that looked like a cheap imitation of Izuku's chiming wings. You did this. How is this cheating? But, Toshinori shook his head, sighing. My boy, look at the work you've done. This was done by your own efforts. There was no unfairness at all. You deserve all the praise and acknowledgments. Izuku sniffled, fat tears threatening to spill over sand-covered cheeks. Thank you, Izuku choked out, ducking his head. I am so blessed. Toshinori laughed, patting him lightly on the head. Now, for our reward. Toshinori coughed and forced his quirk to work, his body doubling in size until All Might was in his place. He raised a hand, silently marveling in how alert he felt. His body didn't feel like it was working on strings. He plucked a blonde strand, holding it out to Izuku. This is the power you've earned from your own efforts, All Might explained as Izuku rubbed at his tears. You made this possible with your strength and strength alone. Izuku hesitantly raised a hand, reaching for the strand of hair. What do I do with this? Izuku took the strand of hair, mouth parting as he slowly brought it back down to him. Eat it, All Might commanded. Izuku paused, looked at him, looked at the strand of hair, stared. What? Izuku asked after a moment of silence. All Might laughed. One for all is passed down from vessel to vessel by DNA. It could be anything. Blood, saliva, hair. All Might stared at the strand of hair pinched between Izuku's thumb and forefinger. Eat up. I'm not. Izuku shoved his hand back towards All Might. Give me a drop of your blood. I'm not eating your hair. That's disgusting. I shower. It's clean. All Might protested as he pushed Izuku's hand back towards his chest. I don't have lice. No. Izuku shoved back as All Might, eyes glowing rings of gold. Give me a drop of your blood instead. I can't. That's unsanitary. All Might shot a hand out, grabbing Izuku by the jaw. Eat, All Might demanded, and Izuku's horrified wails echoed in the rising sun as a single blonde strand of hair was shoved down his throat. His wings reminded her of glass wind chimes, singing songs in the wind as he walked. He looked nervous, she thought, hunched up and mumbling to himself as he walked towards the entrance. His steps were shuffled and his head ducked. He was tripping. And without thinking, she patted his shoulder before he face planted. He gave a soft squeak as she levitated him in midair, his breathtaking gold-ringed eyes meeting hers. His wings fluttered and the air left her lungs, some weird nostalgic pull on her very soul leaving her dazed and numb. "Wouldn't it be bad if you'd tripped?" Uraraka Ochako asked with a nervous tilt in her voice, something in her clenching at the sight of his eyes and wings together. It reminded her of the images she'd see when she surfed the web, of art of angels and otherworldly beings. Without helping in, she whispered, "They're so pretty." She didn't know if she meant his eyes or wings. Both were breathtaking. What? Oh, thank you. He stuttered out, eyes wide as his eyebrows pinched. Uraraka watched at those rings of gold scattered like stardust blanketing the sunset, and exhaled, her eyes itching for some unfathomable reason. Are you okay?" Uraraka blinked, eyes widening as she realized she'd been staring at him in an almost daze. "How embarrassing." Cheeked heated, Uraraka stuttered out affirmative. Good luck." Uraraka stuttered out as she began to walk past the winged boy. "Do your best." Uraraka escaped, ear tips burning as she heard those wind chimes chase after her. Uraraka rushed into the building, finding everyone lingering about until it was time to go to their testing rooms. She wheezed, leaning back against the wall near a blonde boy. How stupid." Uraraka berated herself softly, shoulders hunching up, just staring at him. "Stupid Ochako, stupid." Uraraka looked up, seeing the boy of her current self-talk walking into the room. "But those are such pretty wings." The blonde teen near her flinched, hands clenched into fists at his side. Izuku could feel it, churning in his stomach as his body worked to break it down and spread it throughout his body. Izuku could feel it, the power All Might gave him. Izuku could feel it fighting with his grace, the two battling to dominate his body with its mystic ability. Izuku could feel it, pumping through his veins. Katsuki looked at him from the corner of his eye, arms crossed. Izuku's wings were tucked in tight, tips phasing through the desk behind them. No one was aware. No one else could see them, at least, besides that girl that had been talking to herself. Katsuki gritted his teeth as Izuku muttered to himself, eyes sparkling. His wings were singing in happiness, even from their furled position. It hurt Katsuki's ears, that melodious chiming, like laughter on a summer day, basking under the warmth of the sun, bathed in light. "Shut up," Katsuki growled out, and Izuku stopped talking, looking at him. "Shut them up. Make them stop," chiming a calming lullaby over Katsuki, washing away the tension along his shoulders. "Sorry," Izuku murmured and ducked down, biting at his bottom lip. The melody of his wings declined softly until it was a faint buzz and Katsuki's ears picked up someone sighing in relief. Katsuki's teeth gritted further, giving him a headache from the strain of his jaw. How was he supposed to concentrate when that teen's wings were making such a distracting noise? Everyone else seemed to be ignoring him, probably out of courtesy. Ada Tenya could understand. They were wings. He couldn't very well stop them from chiming like bells. Though Ada wondered just what kind of quirk the teen had with his wings that make such a noise. It reminded him of an old organ playing in the echoing halls of a cathedral. An odd image, considering he was of Shinto faith, but it came to him nonetheless at every tinker of his feathers rustling in the breeze. Ada spoke as he saw the teen move towards a girl who was clearly trying to concentrate. "You're going to bother her. Are you just here to sabotage others from passing?" "You've been a bother." Ada reached a hand and pointed directly at the teen's wings. "You and these noisy wings." Ada watched in mild fascination and curiosity as the teen stiffened, eyes widening. His glasses slipped down his nose, making his gold-speckled eyes all the more captivating as he stared Ada right in the eyes. "My wings," the teen spoke, words articulated with precise stress in all the right letters. "My noisy wings." "That's right," Ada agreed, wondering why the teen was suddenly acting stiff. "I understand if you can't possibly control the sounds that are made from your wings, but that doesn't excuse the fact that you've been disruptive since you've been here. You should just stay in your lane and leave everyone else alone." "My wings," the teen muttered, and Ada shifted back, nodding. Ada looked away, seeing a blonde teen strutting his way towards them. "Excusez-moi," the new arrival spoke, eyes zeroed in on the wings on the teen's back. "What marvelous wings. How do you make them sparkle like they do?" "Yeah," the teen shrieked out, many people glancing over at the loud noise. Before anyone could talk, the exam was called to start. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind, his wings pulsating on his back. 2 people had seen his wings. 2 people. His wings had inched out further, nearly touching his wrists now. A fire coiled through the bones of his wings, burning him with each brush of the tips to his sensitive back. His wings yearned for their touch, for that solidifying bond that had cement them as soulmates. Izuku saw how happy Inko was with Mitsuki, with his father, with her other soulmates. How brightly she shined like his love was bursting from her very insides. Izuku wanted that. He wanted the shared memories, the ability to feel his grace coating them like a second layer of skin, an impenetrable protection. He wanted them to surround him like his love, cherishing every moment with them. And they were there, distant but there. There, not even realizing what he was, what they saw, how they were different from everyone else. They thought it was his quirk, accessories on display. Hey, hey, hey. The girl from earlier called as she skirted around a robot arm. Wings guy. Izuku tripped and slammed against the ground, white noise filling his skull as he jerked up onto his elbows. The girl rushed towards him, breath labored in complex sickly. Izuku stuttered out as his wings stretched out wide, heating up. They were inches longer now as she bent down in front of him, gasping for breath. Your wings. You look. The girl seemed to be struggling with what she wanted to say, her voice cracking as she tried to calm her heaving chest. I know there's no time, but you look like you were struggling. The world exploded as the 0-point robot arrived. Flying rocks slammed into the girl, catapulting her into the air as the world seemed to slow down around Izuku. She hit the ground, rolling into a broken metal panel from a destroyed robot. Blood trickled down her temple from the gash along her temple, her body limp. Examinees were rushing away from the gigantic robot. Izuku stayed knelt down, on the ground, his world dead silent as he stared at the girl's prone, unconscious body. Ida slammed to his knees, gasping for air as unexplainable pressure crashed into him. He saw the blonde teen from earlier stagger, crashing into a robot and using it for support. A trembling, bone-vibrating gong resounded throughout the air as the very surroundings seemed to freeze like the very core of winter had fallen upon them in a blink of an eye. Ida looked back, jaw falling open. Toshinori doubled over in his chair, many of the teachers yelping in alarm as Toshinori's gaze stayed locked on the screen. He could see from one of the screens as Bakugo Katsuki also staggered, slumping to his knees as he clawed at his chest with heaving gasps. He was no better, his chest constricted as his vision flickered a filter of black tendrils and deafening tolls of a church bell. Many teachers gasped as Izuku launched himself in the air, limbs lighting up with the traces of one for all. Someone sucked in a sharp breath from behind him. He couldn't remember who was there. Toshinori saw them though. He was probably the only one in the room who did, though judging by Ida Tenya's and Aoyama Yuga's reactions, they were witness to it too. The 4 other wings that flickered into existence for a brief moment, twisted like deformed bones over clumps of stretched cloth. Izuku slammed his fist into the faux villain, sending it reeling backwards. He lingered there for a moment, his body suspended for a few seconds as his wings stretched out behind him. He looked like a true angel, the wind tossing his hair. There was almost a glow around his body, a faint white that broke off into gold sparkles. The camera observing him zoomed in, showing his clear, glasses-free face. His eyes were pure gold, pupils thin slits. Toshinori jolted when he saw a few teachers gasp loudly, their expressions slacking. Beside him, Nedzu was clapping excitedly, joyfully bouncing up and down in his seat. He couldn't feel it. His legs were mangled, twisted awkwardly. He couldn't feel it. His arm hung limply at his side, bones sticking out and blood steadily flowing from the torn skin. He couldn't feel it. All he felt was that burning desire to protect what was his, protect his soulmate, his soulmate, precious person, his. His eyes fluttered and he arched backwards, gravity taking a hold of him once more. He dropped like a rock, the air whistling around him as he fell. He barely registered yelling, his ears clogged with soft whispers and gentle hums of forgotten songs. Tears itched at his eyes as unconsciousness began to claw at him. His eyes rolled to the back of his head just as he felt 2 pairs of arms wrap around him. The exams are over. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. What's that mean, Mommy? Izuku asked, settled in his mother's lap as she brushed through his curls. His eyes crinkled up as she curled her finger around a bouncy lock, giggling when Inko just hummed thoughtfully. Angels watch over humans, guide them, guard them, observe them, Inko explained as she turned Izuku in her lap, his hands reaching up to grasp at her wings. Angels protect humans, wherever they may go. Izuku's chubby little fingers grazed her wings and the sounds of wind chimes tinkered in the air merrily. So we protect them? Izuku asked, eyes bright as his tiny little clumps fluttered wildly like a hummingbird's beating wings. Yes, Inko cooed as she tapped Izuku on the nose. We protect our soulmates. Izuku failed. He had to have failed. How could he have not failed? He hadn't gotten any points during the exam and had passed out right after destroying the faux villain. He had set himself up for failure. The big fat 0 on his practically dug his grave for him. Inko stared at him in worry over her bowl of rice, taking small bites as Izuku continued to just smile distantly at his fish. Izuku. Inko spoke and Izuku looked up at him. Your wings have gotten longer. Izuku nodded, glancing at the new subject of conversation. I met 3 people at the exam. Izuku confessed finally. He hadn't really talked much during the week since the exam. Hadn't felt like talking. His mother took it in stride, offering silent support during his time of shutting down. Oh my, Inko spoke after a moment, eyes lingering on the new length of her child's wings. During the exam, Inko's eyebrows pinched up. Did you trade contact information with them? Izuku deflated and shook his head, sighing. Oh sweetie, Inko cooed and was up in a second, rounding the table to hug him. She cradled him to her chest, swaying back and forth as Izuku just sat there, letting her comfort him. I'm so sorry. That must hurt so badly. It honestly did. His chest panged with a loneliness he couldn't fill, knowing his soulmates were out there, within reach, but so far away. He didn't know their names, what schools they went to. The doorbell rang and the two looked up, startled by the sudden interruption. Are you expecting anyone? Inko asked, and Izuku shook his head, untangling from his mother's arms to stand. The two went to the door, Izuku peeking behind his mother as she answered the door. Yagi-san, Inko greeted with a confused smile, Izuku's eyes brightening as he caught sight of the skeletal man's frame. Hello, he greeted out as he was led into the apartment. Forgive me for disturbing you so late. I am here on official UA business. They make house calls, Inko asked, looking between her son and one of his soulmates. You work for UA. I volunteer for certain things, like house calls, Toshinori explained vaguely as he slid his shoes off. Izuku pattered into the house, a notable bounce in his step as Inko led him to the couches. I am here on behalf of the school to give Midoriya-kun his test results. My test results, Izuku echoed, color draining from his face. Maybe we should. I have to go anyways, Inko spoke up as she returned from the kitchen with a cup of tea, handing it off to Toshinori. Please take your time. I'll be back in a few minutes. Inko parted with a bow, leaving the two alone in the apartment. Yagi-san, I'm so sorry, Izuku blurted as Toshinori took a sip of his tea. Toshinori continued his long sip, beady blue eyes staring at the child over the brim. For what? Toshinori asked finally as he settled his tea down. He rummaged through his pockets, pulling out a metal ring-type device. For failing the exam. Izuku couldn't look him in the eye as he admitted it, wings drooping into the couch cushions. Toshinori stared at them for a moment, probably wondering how that worked before he huffed. Watch this, and then apologize. Toshinori spoke and placed the metal device down. It lit up and Izuku jumped at the projection of All Might. This is kinda embarrassing, Toshinori admitted as he stared at his super form on the projection. I was late getting you to because I had to fill paperwork out. Paperwork? Izuku dazedly asked as he stared at the image of All Might explaining why it had taken him so long to talk. To work at UA. Toshinori spoke with a smile. Oh, Izuku hummed out, distracted, before blinking. Wait, what? You're going to be working at UA? Izuku nearly jumped up at that and Toshinori nodded, just as the All Might projection said the same thing. I'm going to be teaching there this year. Toshinori spoke as the Pro Might got into a bicker with someone off-screen. Surprise. Oh my holiness. Izuku gasped out as Pro Might explained Izuku's failure at acquiring points. Izuku opened his mouth, only to clamp it shut as the projection changed to show the nice girl from the exam. Excuse me, she called, looking completely healed. Recovery girl must have healed her too. A tiny clench in his heart loosened at seeing her unharmed. The person with the curly hair, and the freckles, and the pretty wingsome, do you know who I'm talking about? Hearing her acknowledge his wings made them stretch out and Toshinori eyed them. You found another soulmate? Toshinori questioned and Izuku nodded wordlessly, lips parting. Is it possible to give him some of my points? Her voice shook as she talked to present Mike, fidgeting with her draped coat. I saw him racing around during the exam and he didn't seem to gather any points, so I'm assuming he was at 0 points? Izuku stared, speechless. He turned his gaze to Toshinori, who was silently watching him. Is this for real? Toshinori nodded solemnly, expression serious. If anything, at least the points he lost from me. Her voice rose a pitch in distress. He saved me. Izuku's eyes sparkled, his wings fluttering out as the girl began to practically beg. Please, please, please. Why is she trying so hard? Izuku breathed out, his wings all but humming behind him. Toshinori raised an eyebrow. Why is she begging for me? You saved her life. Toshinori began slowly, eyebrows furrowing. Why wouldn't she try and help you? I protect her. Izuku spoke easily enough, as if it were a simple fact. I protect my soulmates, not the other way around. Of course I was going to save her, she's my soulmate. Is that an angel thing or? Toshinori gestured to Izuku's wings, visibly uncomfortable. Is that why you healed me? Izuku tilted his head to the side, blinking curiously at Toshinori. I already explained why I healed you, Izuku spoke. It's the same with her. I don't want her hurt. She may not be my bonded soulmate yet, but I still want to protect her. Izuku's attention was stolen again to the projection, where Pro Might revealed the twist to the exam. Izuku stared as the projection came to a close. His wings fell limp behind him. 2 passed. Izuku whispered. Toshinori fidgeted in place, nodding. I passed. Izuku shot up onto his feet and for a second, Toshinori swore he lifted off the ground for a second with how fast his wings were beating. Congratulations. I knew you could do it. Toshinori spoke up and Izuku hopped in place, looking ecstatic. Now, about the repercussions of One for All. Toshinori coughed, looking down at this clean hand out of habit when no blood spat up. It's fine, Izuku spoke as he danced side to side. I couldn't feel the pain. It's another one of my angelic abilities. Toshinori's jaw fell open as the front door opened, Inko shuffling in hesitantly. Izu. Inko looked between Toshinori's gobsmacked expression to Izuku's over-the-moon look and beamed. You got in. She all but flew over to her son, eloping him into a hug. Toshinori couldn't see them, but Izuku beamed happily at the hummingbird-like beats of his mother's wings. Oh my sweet boy. You got in. I did. Izuku laughed and Toshinori coughed, rubbing at the back of his neck. I'll be going now. Toshinori made to get up, only to falter when Inko gently guided him back down into the seat. I'll make more tea. We should celebrate. Ice cream. I have ice cream. Inko flurried into the kitchen and Toshinori studied Izuku again. You can't feel pain? Toshinori asked softly and Izuku hummed. Nope. Unless it's inflicted by my soulmates, I can't. I can't to a certain degree. But the drawbacks didn't hurt at all. Izuku spoke simply with a nervous grin. A perk of not being fully human, you know. Not fully human. Oh yes. That's true. Toshinori slumped back into the seat. I forget. It's okay. Inko hummed as she returned, ice cream and tea drawn towards her from the kitchen. You'll slowly get used to it. Inko settled down everything and sat next to Izuku. So, how have you been? 1A where is 1A? Izuku wondered, looking at the labeled doors. This school is too big. I'm lost. Are you lost too? Izuku jumped, spinning to see the nice girl from the exam. She beamed happily, waving cheerfully, and Izuku's wings warmed at the sight of her. We can find our classes together. You 1 or 1B? I am 1A. Izuku stuttered out and the girl's smile seemed to widen. How about you? Me too. The girl bowed low. I'm Uraraka Ochako. Thank you very much for saving me. Izuku bowed back, flustered. Uraraka's eyes slid to his wings and they seemed to stretch out at the attention. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Of course I'd save you. Izuku blurted before he could stop himself and his cheeks heated. How you can see my wings, right? Uraraka's gaze snapped to Izuku and her lips pursed out into a pout. Yeah, why wouldn't I be able to? Oh, does it have something to do with your quirk? Uraraka skipped closer, a hand raised. She paused, looking embarrassed. Oh, sorry, just, your wings are so pretty. The two stood there in the hallway, awkward as they studied each other. Do you want to touch them? Izuku licked his lips, his wings furling up as Uraraka's expression brightened. Can I? Oh, pretty please. Uraraka reached her hand out and Izuku turned, ducking his head as he felt a meek poke. Uraraka's palm flattened against his feathers and he inhaled. A burst of warmth, bittersweet smiles at working parents, joyous laughter, salty tears, late nights staying up waiting for parents to come home. Whoa, Uraraka wheezed out as she stumbled back, blinking rapidly. What was that? Those aren't normal wings from a quirk, are they? Izuku gave a soft smile and Uraraka's breath hitched in her throat. I can explain it all to you at lunch, if you want. We should get going, we don't want to be late. Izuku reached up and plucked a feather, passing it over to Uraraka. Uraraka took it without thought, cradling it to her chest as she continued to blink. This, Uraraka stammered out, is pulsing. Your feather is pulsing. Uraraka stared at Izuku with wide eyes. Does it have to wait until lunch? Izuku gave an apologetic smile and nodded, holding a hand out. Uraraka clasped his hand without thinking. Once more, her mind and body instantly trustful of this teenager. She didn't know why, but maybe it had to do with the images she saw when she touched his wing. A burning light, scattering feathers, bell-like chimes that vibrated in her ribcage. Her heart was swayed, already won over by his boyish charm, dotted freckles, and dimpled smile. Here we are. Uraraka spoke and the two took a moment to stare at the gigantic door. They must design it for everyone. Izuku gave her hand a tight squeeze before letting go, opening the door. Oh father, you tease me. Izuku mumbled to himself as he caught sight of the two boys from his exam, glasses and sparkles as he dubbed them, and Katsuki. Deku. Katsuki snarled the moment he caught sight of Izuku. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Uraraka at his shoulder, peering innocently into the classroom. The fuck you doing here? Deku, Uraraka whispered. Is that a nickname? Izuku shrugged his shoulders, maintaining eye contact with Katsuki. Uraraka stuffed her feather into her skirt pocket, feeling as if she had to hide it when Katsuki glared daggers at her. Kaken, Izuku greeted and then jumped backwards when Glasses was suddenly in his face. Excuse me, Glasses spoke and bowed. I'm Idatenya. I would just like to say that I found your act of heroism very admirable. What? Izuku stuttered out, shrinking away as the teen nodded vigorously and leaned closer. Heroism. Uraraka patted his shoulders and gestured for him to get into the classroom. The two stepped into the classroom and many eyes were on them. You jumped in, despite knowing your time limit, the amount of points you had, and the waste of time defeating the faux villain to save Uraraka-san here. Ida spoke as he gestured to Uraraka. You saved her life after she was rendered unconscious by a flying piece of debris from the faux villain's entrance. That was very admirable of you, my friend. Why? Izuku spoke, eyes gaining a ring of gold around them as he peered seriously at Ida. I would save her without any hesitation. Why do you act like such a thing is something to be in awe of? You care for and protect one another, do you not? Izuku's wings ruffled in clear agitation. Katsuki snarled loudly and kicked violently at his desk, jerking it out of place. A few students jolted at the sudden scratch of metal legs against the tile flooring. Stop fucking preaching, Deku. We ain't at church or wherever the fuck you think this is. Sit down. Actually, a new voice spoke up and Uraraka squealed, pushing into Izuku as the two turned, peering down at the adult in a yellow sleeping bag. It's better if you stand. Uraraka shoved Izuku further into the classroom as the man slipped out of the sleeping bag, appearance looking worse for wears. He dug through the sleeping bag, pulling out a handful of jumpsuits. Everyone, change into these. And meet me at the PE grounds, the man spoke and tossed Ida, Uraraka, and Izuku a uniform. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shouta. Nice to meet you. Let's move. Ida could only stare, mind racing. Midoriya Izuku, as he'd introduced, was stripping off his white uniform shirt. Ida could not, for the life of him, look away. Now, Ida was not a pervert. He had common decency to know not to stare at someone when they were changing. But it seemed that himself, and basically all of the boys in their class, had forgotten their manners as they unashamedly gawked at the freckled teen. How could they not, though, when his wings seemed to phase through the material as if they were transparent apparitions? How could they not, when his wings chimed and sung sounds of church choirs and left shimmering lights to dance across the room from reflected sunlight? The only two not zoned in on Izuku was Mainta Minoru, as he'd introduced, and Bakugo Katsuki. As Katsuki zipped up his gym uniform front, he shoved past Izuku, causing the teen to stumble. Stop dragging your feet, you fucking background characters. Katsuki snarled and stormed out of the classroom, the girls lingering as they waited for the boys. The rest of them hurried, Izuku's wings seeming to pass on through his gym suit as if they weren't really there. It was the most particular thing Ida had ever seen about someone's quirk. Midoriya-kun, Ida called as he carefully folded his uniform up, placing it on his desk. Izuku looked up, smiling and greeting as Ida made his way over. If you don't mind me asking, what is the circumstances of your wings? I understand they are part of your quirk, but... Izuku raised a hand, gesturing for Ida to stop talking. You can see my wings, right? Izuku asked softly and Ida nodded, expression twisting into one of analytical confusion. He was picking apart what Izuku was saying, or rather, what he wasn't. For now, can you please keep quiet about them? There are special circumstances with my wings, okay? Izuku gave a sheep smile and Ida nodded. Of course, forgive me for prying into your personal life. Ida apologized and Izuku shook his head, eyes glowing brightly with those rings of gold. Never apologize to me, okay? Izuku laughed and Ida blinked, eyebrows furrowing. Yes, of course, Ida spoke and the two left the classroom, tagging along behind the rest of the classroom. Ida's eyes trickled back to Izuku's wings, watching them seemingly sway in an invisible breeze. This were honestly beautiful, and Ida couldn't stop himself from reaching out and touching them. It was instantaneous. White, 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 gold, black, gentle touches, whispers, a lost name murmured on lips without a proper body. Father, Creator, Yahweh, God, Lord, Him, He. Warmth, endless warmth, tender and caring and gentler than anything he'd ever felt before. Thousands of voices crescendoing together, escalating into an almost deafening pitch of chants of His holiness, of His presence. Millions, maybe billions, of wings swarming the sky, drowning him, burning him, keeping him afloat as he fell. Ida stumbled back with a shuddering breath, eyes clearing up to see Izuku stumble forward, his foot catching on the back of his opposite heel. What was that? Ida wheezed, seeing Uraraka gradually slow her pace until she was almost next to them. What was that? That wasn't normal, couldn't be normal. Did he have a dual quirk? But what he saw, those images, they weren't human. They were otherworldly. And the implications? Deku-kun, Uraraka asked as she saddled up beside him, the hallways awkwardly quiet as the class made their way to the PE grounds. You two okay? Deku-kun, Izuku stuttered out, color draining from his face. Please don't call me that. Izuku or Midoriya is fine. But please not. Izuku looked down, please not Deku. Oh, I'm so sorry. I heard that one guy call you it and thought it was a nickname. Kinda reminds me of Deku, you know. Ochako beamed and Izuku drew back, eyes widening. Oh, he breathed out, a small smile making its way onto his face. I can kind of see that. I like how you think that. It's okay to continue to call me that. With that, Izuku wordlessly plucked a feather out, holding it out to Ida. I'll explain at lunch, was all he said, and Ida robotically grabbed the feather. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the teen with the two-toned hair watching them curiously. Uraraka's mouth fell open and, as if to share a moment of camaraderie with Ida, revealed her own feather tucked in the pocket of her gym uniform. Ada followed suit and stashed his away, mind skipping as he realized it was warm and pulsing. Like a heartbeat. Like an actual goddamn heartbeat. Ada's mind crashed. He must have had a seizure or a stroke because suddenly he was outside. Izuku and Uraraka on either side of him. Aizawa was speaking and Ada jolted because what? Pay attention please, Izuku whispered, and for some reason, Ada felt himself calm down. It's okay. I'll explain at lunch, okay? Ada nodded mutely and chanced a glance at Izuku's wings again. They were longer. He was intrigued. He'd never seen wings like that before, not from someone's quirk. They were almost otherworldly, something other in a way he couldn't exactly describe without feeling uncomfortable. He wasn't religious, his father having beaten the mentality that you grasp for things yourself, not wishing on some make-believe deity for all the answers to your problems. He wasn't religious, but that didn't stop him from immediately comparing his classmates' wings to those religious figures the Christians believed in. Angels. They were musical, reminding him of the wind chimes his sister would hang up in the summer and spring. They were transparent, like painted glass, creating breathtaking collages of blotched colors along his skin and the ground, the sun's rays dancing through them as if to complement them. Todoroki Shoto watched as his two other classmates, Uraraka and Ada, he remembered, showed each other their feathers, and for some reason, a childish desire to have a feather brewed deep in his heart. Which was weird, because why would he want a feather? But the longer he stared at those wings, the longer the desire to go over and pluck one grew and festered. He couldn't explain why he was feeling what he was. He couldn't explain why his stomach twisted and clenched in a way that only ever was felt when his mother would smile at him. He couldn't understand why looking at those wings brought up every single good, cherished memory of his mother, of her laughter and smiles. He couldn't put into words why his heart clenched and any tension that was almost embedded into his bones slowly melted away at the sight of those wings. Hearing them chime, seeing the students smile. Those gold-ringed eyes were calling to him on an incoherent wavelength that he wasn't privy to yet. He caught the words, "I'll explain at lunch," and decided he had found some people to eat with that day for lunch. Soon he'd be on their frequency, and maybe his chest would stop trying to cave in on itself. Katsuki was up first. He wowed the class with his throw of over 700 meters. Izuku hung back, nerves eating him alive. He was kind of afraid to try anything. He wasn't very well trained in his quirk yet. And while his angelic grace could help in on some occasions, physical activities were not one of them. Good luck. Uraraka cheered to both him and Ada, patting the two on the shoulder. She smiled and Izuku gave a weak smile, unable to muster anything else up when his thoughts were too loud for him to concentrate. The last ranked kid would be expelled. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut tight and exhaled. He wanted to be a hero. He wanted to do good in the world, follow what his father would want. What is expected of him? Izuku's eyes slipped open, the rings of gold burning like dying embers in a fireplace. He would not be last. Better said than done, however. As mentioned, angelic grace was good and dandy when it didn't involve physical fitness. Izuku, despite his months of training, could not meet the standards his classmates were setting. "Why don't you use your wings to fly?" Uraraka asked softly, and Izuku's wings drooped in sadness. "I can't fly," Izuku whispered back, pushing back the phantom sting of burning feathers. "Not right now, at least." Uraraka frowned before nodding. The tests continued, Izuku finding himself in last place each and every time. He groaned, bending over to catch his breath. It was time for the pitch. Izuku would use one for all. He didn't feel pain anyways, so it wouldn't matter if he mangled his arm. With his angelic grace, he'd heal by the end of tomorrow at most, depending on how bad the injury was. Nodding to himself, he went to throw the ball. Izuku's mind tingled as if fairy dust was being sprinkled over his head. A heavy dong of a bell echoed throughout the air and his eyes burned fully gold. The ball left his hand without the help of his quirk and Izuku's wings stretched out and flailed in agitation. 46 meters. "I erased your quirk," Aizawa explained, and the field went silent as those burning gold eyes bore into Aizawa's glowing red gaze. "How did someone like you get into the academy? You can barely control your quirk, from what I've seen." Aizawa marched towards him, his bandages shooting out to grab Izuku. Or they tried to. The moment they got close enough, they reflected off his wings, recoiling as if burned. Izuku stared up at the hero, gold eyes slowly retreating to the green with gold ring. Aizawa's eyes drifted to Izuku's wings. "Another thing," he murmured softly as he stepped into Izuku's personal space. "What is the deal with your wings? Are they a part of your quirk? You have strength enhancement, don't you?" Izuku's mouth parted and he stumbled back when Aizawa raised a hand. His wings tucked up against his back, burning for the touch but also wary of the man's emotions. "You can see me wings," Izuku stuttered out, ducking further away from Aizawa. "They're special. They're the test. How you've used your quirk is amateurish at best. You're going to end up being the one who needs saved. Do you want that?" Aizawa watched him, lips tugged down in a frown. Izuku's face slackened and he shook his head. "I won't," he whispered, and then louder, "I won't be the one who needs saving. Let me use my quirk again. I'll show you. Aizawa stared at him for a moment before his eyes stopped glowing and Izuku felt the new but comforting glow of one for all in his system. Aizawa went back to the students and Izuku sighed. He picked up the ball, calling on his quirk. Forgive me, father, for my selfishness, Izuku whispered softly to himself as he drew his arm back. Forgive me for my greed and desire to show off. Forgive me for straying from my path during this moment. Forgive me for the fear I feel in this very moment. Please continue to guide me, father. Amen. Izuku surged all of his power into his index finger as he pitched the ball, the wind and ground under him cracking as he shot the ball into the air. Izuku looked down at his hand, seeing his mangled, ugly finger drip blood. He pushed his grace towards his finger, watching with sick fascination as the digit slowly twisted itself into its correct position. His focus was disrupted as Katsuki roared, charging him. Aizawa shot his bandages at him, only to jolt when they were recoiled. Katsuki tackled Izuku, sending them tumbling. Katsuki sat on Izuku's stomach, knees pinning his wings to the ground. Izuku stared up at him, chest heaving at his eyes dilated. Why the fuck are you here? Katsuki roared. What the fuck was that? More of your freaky shit. Katsuki raised a hand, sparks sounding in his palm, and Izuku's face went blank, gold overtaking the green. Katsuki, Izuku murmured and Katsuki went rigid. Get off me, please. Katsuki wavered, eyebrows pinching up, before he clambered off Izuku. Izuku did a somersault away from the volatile teen, standing up as he flexed his wings. Katsuki went to charge again, only to be grabbed by Aizawa. Stop it, Aizawa snapped and Katsuki stilled under his hands. I don't know what you two have, but leave your beef at the gates. Do I make myself clear? Aizawa looked between the two and they both nodded silently. Aizawa released Katsuki, expression pinched. Why had his bandages recoiled from the violent teen? He eyed Katsuki and then saw it, peeking out of his uniform collar. The tiny tuft of a feather, colors matching Izuku's wings. What? Izuku barely paid attention as Aizawa explained his logical ruse to the class, wings tucked up defensively as Uraraka and Ida flanked his sides. Katsuki was on the other side of the students, glowering at nothing. Aizawa bid them a good day and left, leaving them to chatter amongst themselves. Let's go get changed and get lunch, the loud redhead called, the pink girl giving a cheer of agreement. We have a schedule, Ida called out, making hand-chopping motions. After we change, we have orientation and then. Shut the fuck up, Katsuki roared, stomping away from the class. What a jerk, Uraraka grumbled to herself and nudged Izuku's shoulder. You okay? Izuku looked up at her and smiled gently. Yes, thank you. Izuku felt his heart swell when Uraraka nodded happily and began to skip after the class. Izuku trailed behind, wings drooping. Now he just had to deal with lunchtime. All things considered, his first day at UA was going pretty decent. Sure, it had been a major letdown that he couldn't be in the heroics course, but he wasn't going to let that tear his spirits. If anything, it urged him to push harder than the rest to prove to the world that they were wrong, that he was hero material. So what if his quirk didn't do any damage? The test was flawed and he knew it. His classmates seemed nice enough, all things considered. They were a little on edge, hearing of his quirk from testers that also didn't make it. He didn't mind. He was used to it. It didn't bother him much. People didn't look at him or his quirk in awe. No one but his parents did. The lesson plans looked solid and interesting, and Shinsu, he was booking it out of there before he even sat down at his table. No. Shinsu screamed to the heavens as he turned to see that blasted kid with the wings speed walking his way over to him, those fluttering wings chiming like musical bells. Shinsu, it is you. Go away. Shinsu desperately tried to manipulate him, only to die a little inside as Izuku bulldozed right on towards him. Izuku latched onto his arm and his chest thrummed in warmth. Oh my god. You're a stalker. What? No, we're sitting over there for lunch. Izuku gestured over his shoulder and Shinsu saw a girl and a boy in a secluded-looking table in the back corner wave at him. Come sit with us. I'm sitting. Shinsu turned to his classmates, only to see them all avoiding him. The traitors. If I say yes, will you leave me alone? No promises. Izuku smiled and tugged on Shinsu's free hand, careful not to make him topple his lunch tray. Come on. I'm so happy we got to see each other again. Me too, a tiny part of Shinsu whispered and he stomped down on the warmth of that tiny voice. It had to be the warmth or those strange gold ringed eyes. It had to be the reason for that traitorous voice wanting more time with the weird teen. So, Izuku spoke as he pushed his glasses up, gesturing to the occupants at the table. This is Uraraka-chan and this is Ida-kun. Guys, this is Shinsu-kun and I'm Aoyama Yuga. Aoyama spoke as he all but threw himself onto the table, sprawling out as he posed elegantly. Hello. They all stared at his sparkling form. I'm Todoroki Shoto. Todoroki spoke as he stiffly slid into the chair across from Uraraka. Izuku blinked. Hi. Izuku looked to Uraraka and Ida, who stared back just as confused. Are you wanting to join us? I just want to know what you do to make your wings so gorgeous. Aoyama spoke and without pause, stroked a hand down Izuku's wing. Izuku and Aoyama stiffened, Aoyama releasing a whoosh of air as he slumped down into a seat. Ole vash. What? Shinsu should leave. Just YET on out of there like All Might punched him into the sun. Just leave. Sit down. Izuku gestured to the table. Please. Shinsu wavered before he went screw it and plopped down next to the still Aoyama. Izuku settled down between him and Uraraka and sighed. First off, you can all see my wings, Izuku spoke, plucking a feather from his wing. He handed it over to Aoyama, who jerkily moved to grab it. As he did so, Todoroki's eyes followed after the feather in almost a feverish trance. Is that correct? Why wouldn't we be able to? Shinsu asked slowly, shoulders twitching upwards when Izuku looked at him. Am I missing something? Shinsu jerked away when one of Izuku's wings raised up towards him. You can touch it if you'd like, Izuku instructed softly, kindly, without pressure or expectation. Shinsu's hand stayed gripping his milk carton. Do it, Uraraka chanted in a whisper. Touch it, touch it, touch it. Was this a cult? Shinsu ducked his head, immediately regretting his decision to sit with them. What was he getting into? God, if someone walked by right at this moment. Izuku shifted nervously in his chair, running a hand through his wings to straight the strewn feathers. How to put this lightly? Izuku pressed his lips together. Normal people can't see my wings. The table fell silently as 4 pairs of eyes stared at his wings. Normal people. Shinsu breathed out noisily through his nose. Face deadpan. Can't see your wings. Izuku fiddled with his lunch, popping a rolled-up piece of bread into his mouth. No, Izuku swallowed the bread. They can't. Because they aren't from a quirk, are they? Ada asked, hands laced together on top of the tabletop as he stared seriously at Izuku. Those images, they weren't human. Images? Shinsu asked, Todoroki looking just as confused as the two turned from Izuku to What images? If you touch my wings. Izuku spoke and stood, his wings folding over him. Ada stared. The wings phased through the table. Uraraka's mouth was parted as Todoroki raised a hand. You'll understand. Aoyama looked around the cafeteria, catching more than one person staring at them, or more accurately, Izuku. He hummed, thumbing the feather he was gifted. It was warm, filling him with a sense of comfort and peace. He felt protected, as if being wrapped in one of his mother's hugs. Shinsu watched Todoroki brush his fingers through the sparkling feathers, and those two-toned eyes went wide before glossing over. Izuku's body tensed and went rigid, hands curling into fists. Oh, to hell with it. Shinsu spoke and planted a hand firmly on Izuku's wing, near his bone. Church bells ringing, a solemn choir singing a song of mourning. The sounds of thousands of wings beating in the air on takeoff. Deep, resonating weeping that shook him to the very core. A gravelly voice, choked of life from all the death they breathe in. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. Wings tinkling full of sorrow, drooped down and touching dirt. Mindless patterns scrawled in the gravel. Boredom unbecoming as wood was lowered into the earth. Humans grieve, they'd said, drawing their attention from the hunched forms of fragile mortality. Be respectful. Father made them grieve. They responded in kind. I would do nothing to go against him. Shinsu jerked back, windmilling his arms to keep from toppling over as his heart hammered in his rib cage. What was that? What was that? What was that? What was that? Shinsu blurted out, face pale. Seriously? What was that? Oh, you got a recent memory, Izuku murmured to himself, looking guilty. I'm sorry. Despite his words, despite the chilling sense of sheer terror those images brought him, Shinsu felt something inside him click as if a piece of him was finally in place. He chanced a glance at Todoroki, only to stare at the tears streaming down the teen's cheeks. No, don't cry, Izuku cooed, plucking one of his feather. He leaned across the table, handing the feather to Todoroki. Todoroki took it, cradling it to his chest as he ducked his head down. What are you? Shinsu asked, and the entire table snapped to attention, turning to Izuku for answers. Izuku plopped back down into his seat, wings drawn up close to his body. Those wings aren't from a quirk, right? What are you? Do you believe in angels? Izuku whispered softly, peering up at them. His shoulders were hunched, wings, they were longer, acting like a shield. He looked small, vulnerable and small, afraid of their answers. No way, Uraraka gasped out. No way. Ada looked just as dumbstruck, Aoyama staring with his tight-lipped V-smile and Todoroki still sniffling over his feather. Shinsu just waited for Izuku to continue. Your wings phase through things. Ada spoke and Shinsu blinked because really, that's what he wanted to bring up. Not the fact that this kid thought he was an angel. Why can we see them? You acted surprised when I mentioned them. Humans have a very particular idea of what an angel is. Izuku spoke softly, picking at his nail bed. Shinsu watched, enraptured, as the skin immediately grew back. What the? My family comes from a long line of descendants of angels who bred with humans. Bred with Uraraka wheezed. You're what? Half angel? Izuku shook his head, biting his lower lip. So, the reason you guys can see my wings, Izuku ignored Uraraka's question, staring intently at the tabletop, is because you guys share a piece of my soul. Utter silence from those at the table. What? Aoyama spoke up finally. We share your soul. Izuku nodded rapidly, hands flailing as he began to talk. He cleared his throat, gold-ringed eyes glowing as his expression flattened into a serious one. People who can see my wings, Izuku began as he leaned closer to the group, share a tiny piece of my soul. I am bound to them for life. They are either my precious people Izuku inhaled or my beloved enemies destined to constantly clash with me. We call them soulmates. Soulmates, Todoroki whispered in a daze, still clinging to that feather like a lifeline. Bound to us for life. Izuku nodded and Uraraka pulled out her own feather. Shinsu mentally gagged. Did everyone have a feather? Where was his feather? Is that why my quirk doesn't work on you? Shinsu asked finally, watching Izuku pluck a feather from his wing. He handed it to Shinsu, who only hesitated for a second before he grabbed the feather. He blinked. Oh, no wonder Todoroki wouldn't stop hugging it to his chest. It was so warm, so comforting. Shinsu felt his exhaustion seep away, just the tiniest bit. Well, my precious soulmates cannot hurt me. That also involves quirks, Izuku explained. My beloved enemies on the other hand. Izuku's expression flashed. Pale and haunted, shadows casting over him for a second. Anyways, any questions? Uraraka snorted out, yeah. So you're an angel. An actual angel. Uraraka bounced in her seat. So you're like our guardian angel. Izuku's face burst into a blinding beam. Exactly. Izuku clapped his hands together, lacing them as if to pray. I'm your guardian angel. While you carry my feather, no harm shall come to you. Izuku faltered. If you wish to no longer have my grace, you may reject it. Reject it? Ida questioned the same time Aoyama asked. Grace? Grace is basically my essence, Izuku explained carefully. I have plenty and it replenishes, so never fear. If you wish to no longer share a piece of my soul, you can cast the grace out of your soul. All you have to do is wish it on the feather. Grace out of our soul, Shinsu echoed. When he swallowed, when did we get this grace? Izuku's eyes slid to the side. The moment you touched my wings. When you touched my wings, it initiated the bond between us. You were given a tiny piece of my soul, and I collected a tiny bit of yours. My grace was the piece you were gifted with. That what those memories were. Izuku tugged on his bangs. Any other questions? Does it have any perks? Ida asked as he studied Izuku. Besides the protection. Izuku shook his head with a sad smile. Sadly, no. A guardian angel can only do so much, he explained. He looked down at his untouched lunch. Anything else? This is so cool, Uraraka whispered aloud. Aoyama held the feather up to the light, marveling in the sparkling light show. Todoroki was thumbing his own feather, silent, and Ida continued to observe Izuku. Your wings are longer, Shinsu pointed out, and Izuku looked back at his stretched wings. He smiled like the sun had gifted him. Every time I meet a new soulmate, they grow. Every time I initiate a bond, they grow, Izuku explained patiently. Thank you very much for listening to me. For believing me. Izuku smiled. Thank you. We live in a world with quirks, Shinsu spoke. How is this any less believable? The lunch bell rang, signaling the end of the period. Shinsu stood, catching sight of many students quickly averting their eyes. Eavesdroppers. Shinsu awkwardly waved goodbye to the group, leaving them to hurry out of the room. He ignored his traitorous classmates' inquires. It hurt. It felt like his mother's loving embrace. Like the night she'd hug him tight, whispering prayers of protection from deities he was not allowed to believe in. It hurt. It burned like the boiling water that stole away his vision, that tore his family apart. There was something weird about the tiny little feather, soothing his nerves and chasing away any fear or memory. He almost recalled the moment it tried to pop into his head. It hurt because it was a comfort he hadn't felt in a long time and he didn't know how to react. The warmth radiating from the feather was too much. But at the same time, Todoroki craved more. He sat there in class, stroking a finger over the feather. It pulsed like a heartbeat and Todoroki faintly wondered if it was in sync with Izuku's own heart. The last class for the day was dismissed and Todoroki stood up. He dragged his feet, not wanting to walk home yet. He didn't want to go back to that house, to that man. But at the same time, his sister might be home, which was always a bonus. Todoroki-kun. Izuku spoke as he stood at Todoroki's desk. Would you like to walk home with us? Todoroki looked to see Uraraka, Ida, and Aoyama waiting by the door. He studied them for a second, mulling over his options. No thank you, Todoroki spoke finally. Maybe another day. His father was already home, he knew. If he didn't return promptly home, his father was almost insufferable to handle. See you tomorrow. Todoroki ducked out of the classroom, not seeing those melted gold-eyed burning into his back. Kaken, look. My wings grew. Izuku charged right into Katsuki, who planted himself firmly into the ground as the smaller ball of green energy slammed into him. Look. The tiny toddler turned giddily, stretching his feeble little tufts of feathers out as far as they'd go. They were no longer than Katsuki's hands, looking like little puffballs, but he smiled all the same as he touched one of those tufts, feeling the warmth lingering on his palm. They did, Katsuki spoke, even as he struggled to see the change. Good job. Izuku giggled and turned, burrowing into Katsuki's chest. It's because you're my soulmate. Mama says that my bond strengthens my wings. Izuku chirped out, smile bright. So thank you. Katsuki shoved at Izuku, cheeks red. Shut up, Izu. Katsuki stuttered out. Their mother's a little ways away from them, talking softly to themselves and looking at them every so often. I'm your only soulmate, so of course they'd be strong wings. I'm strong. That's because Kaken is my precious person. Izuku laughed. Blood stained his hands. Clumps of those stained glass feathers stuck to his palms as his flesh blistered and melted. Katsuki jerked up from sleep, sweat trickling down his brow as he gasped for air. He scrambled, turning on his bedside lamp so his room was basked in faint lights. He looked down at his trembling hands, inspecting the sweaty, shaking fingers for any blood or feathers. Seeing none, his shoulders drooped the tiniest bit. He clenched tightly at the feather wrapped around his neck, ignoring the pin pricks of irritation the touch caused to his skin. He looked over at his alarm clock, seeing he had 2 hours before he was supposed to wake up. He couldn't go back to sleep. His chest heaved as he tried to regulate his breathing, his palm throbbing. He pulled his hand away from his feather, looking down at his swollen, blistered palm. He watched, fascinated, as the blisters slowly receded, leaving unblemished, smooth skin. Katsuki curled his hand tight into a fist, hunching forward as he drew his knees up to his chest. Damn it, Katsuki choked out, the feather beating in a steady, calming pace. Damn it. He stayed balled up, trying to collect his breathing as he pushed the long-buried memories from his mind. Izuku's feather hummed, glowing a faint fold color as if singing a song. Katsuki turned his head, straining his ear to listen to the faint hymn the feather released. Shitty Deku, Katsuki slurred as his body sagged, slumping back against his bedding. Soft snores escaped his parted lips and the lamp flickered before turning off. The humming and glowing ceased and the feather rested innocently on his collarbone, pulsating in sync with Izuku's heart. The sky was still streaked with stripes of lavender and navy, the sun not yet peeking out. Izuku breathed out, watching the faint morning dew glistening as his wings glowed. He hunched over, trying to regulate his breathing as his heart thundered in his chest. 12 blocks, Toshinori commented as he zoomed by on his Segway. He did a circle, looking alarmed as the scooter jolted back for a second. Not bad. He did another circle, rounding back to cruise next to Izuku. Good job on keeping up with your training. I'd like to make sure my body doesn't keep getting caught in the crossfire. Izuku gasped out, straightening as he began a slow jog, keeping up with Toshinori. Despite me not feeling pain like a normal person, I still don't want to put that strain on my limbs. Izuku stretched his legs, exhaling a long drag of air. I see, Toshinori spoke, rocking back and forth on his Segway. That is troubling. Izuku gave a soft snort as Toshinori shot forward, speeding down the pathway of the park. Keep up. Izuku gave a whine and rushed after the man, burst out laughing as the Segway jostled from a branch in the way. Get off that stupid thing. Izuku wheezed out as Toshinori righted himself and did a tiny circle to make sure his vehicle was okay. You don't even need it anymore. Never. Toshinori spoke seriously and Izuku doubled over, gasping for air as he laughed himself nearly sick. I'm sorry, my boy, Toshinori thought to himself as he tittered on his Segway, reversing and speeding up in a way to tease Izuku. I hope you're still laughing by the end of the day. Izuku chanced a glance at Todoroki, eyeing him as they waited for the first bell of the day to ring. He was settled in his desk, head down as he thumbed over his feather. He'd been touching it a lot, Izuku felt, and could feel the emotions seeping into it. Bitterness, resentment, anguish, remorse, loath, loneliness, and a small bit of warmth, a tiny smidge of happiness as he stroked his feather. Izuku turned around again, meeting eyes with Katsuki. Katsuki was turned in his seat, eyes narrowed as he stared at Izuku's wings. They're fucking longer, Katsuki snarled low in his throat. He leaned against Izuku's desk, keeping his voice low. Who is it? Katsuki eyes flashed over to Todoroki, eyes trickling down to his feather. His face scrunched up before his eyes swept around the classroom. Uraraka and Ida were clustered over by Aoyama, chattering lowly to themselves. He squinted suspiciously at them. Thank you for your concern, Izuku whispered softly, lifting a hand. He hesitated before dropping it down onto the desk surface, a few inches from Katsuki's propped-up arm. Izuku worried at his bottom lip. You've had a nightmare last night. Katsuki slammed his palm down on the desk with a tiny explosion, the classroom falling silent as he shot up to his feet. His desk squeaked as it pushed forward from the force, and Izuku's expression shut down as Katsuki leaned in close, eyes hooded. Shut your mouth, Katsuki hissed, hands trembling with suppressed rage. Don't fucking bring that shit up. Don't act like you know everything, Deku. The classroom door opened and Aizawa paused, seeing the two in the tense class. Is there a problem? Aizawa asked, watching those wings tuck in close like a dog with their tail. Katsuki's nose scrunched up and he turned, writing his desk. Satu, switch desks with Midoriya. Satu complied wordlessly, and Izuku stiffly gathered his bag, gaze downcasted as Katsuki huffed and slumped in his seat. Satu nodded to Izuku, eyes trailing after those wings as the team passed. Izuku settled into his new desk, Uraraka and Ida turning happily in greeting while Todoroki just bumped his shoe against the desk leg. The class was silent. "Okay, roll call," Aizawa began and sighed loudly. Classes at UA were weird, to say the least. Up until their afternoon hero classes, the school performed like an actual, school. They studied their core subjects and electives up until noon before they had lunch. After lunch, they spent the remainder of the day focusing on their heroics courses, learning from various pro heroes what it takes to be an actual hero. "I am here." All Might burst through the classroom door, leaning into it while gripping onto the frame like a child trying to test gravity, coming through the door like a normal person. Honestly, Izuku was surprised he didn't bust in with that stupid segue of his. How is that normal? Many of the students mentally screamed as All Might pranced to the podium, humming loudly. Izuku perked up, his wings humming in tune to All Might's singing as he stood tall. Izuku's wings stretched and flapped once in joy, feeling how alive All Might was. He'd been around the man in his default form, unable to properly grasp the effects of his grace in the man's system as it worked to heal him. It was working all right. Izuku could barely feel any lingering signs of sickness, could feel no pain, no struggling breaths or throbbing bones. Uraraka and Todoroki both glanced at Izuku as his wings gave another pleased hum, Ida's shoulders relaxing at the soothing sound. All Might cleared his throat, looking slightly flustered as he pointedly avoided looking at Izuku. Foundational Hero Studies. For this class, we'll be teaching you the fundamentals of being a hero through various lessons and trials. All Might flexed, showing off his bulging muscles. Beside him, Uraraka choked. "Let's not beat around the bush," All Might exclaimed and shoved a small card out towards the class. "Let's start with the trial of battle." "Trial of battle?" Izuku mumbled, his stomach sinking. Something cold spiked through his chest at the mentioned trial. What did it mean? "We have prepared your uniforms from the forms that you filled out and sent in." All Might spoke and Izuku perked up. "Get dressed and meet me at Training Ground B." The students grabbed their uniforms, chattering amongst themselves as they moved to the changing rooms. Izuku hugged his package to his chest thrumming in anticipation as he followed Todoroki and Aoyama to the stalls. "Where's your costume, Midoriya-kun?" Aoyama asked as he stripped his button down. Eyebrow quirked up as Izuku just hugged his backpack tighter to his chest. "Ah, in here. My mother made it." Izuku stammered out as he placed his backpack down, opening the flap. He pulled out the folded green jumpsuit, pausing as his cheeks heated. "She was a bit silly with it, but it works in the long run. It's handmade." Izuku hugged the cloth to his front protectively. "I'm proud to wear it." "How admirable," Ida commented as he adjusted his breastplate. "That is very sweet of you." Izuku nodded and quickly shrugged off his school uniforms, folding his clothing up neatly before slipping his hero costume on. The bathroom stopped. Todoroki stared, ice pausing and coating his left side. Katsuki walked into an open stall door. "Is that an open back?" Kaminari wheezed out and Izuku stilled. His cheeks heated up and his wings drew around him, trying to cover him. "And my mom thought it would be funny," Izuku stuttered out. "I said it was silly." He closed his eyes, slipping his glasses off. He was quick to slip his mask up, adjusting the installed goggles against his face before opening his eyes. He gently tucked his folded glasses into his back and nibbled on his bottom lip. "Izuku," Inko spoke as she skipped into the living room, holding out a green jumpsuit. "Todo, Mom." Izuku looked up as he and Toshinori crowded over the paperwork for registering his quirk. "What's that?" Izuku stood up, taking the jumpsuit. "This looks like it's your hero costume." Inko cheered, looking proud but self-conscious at the same time as Toshinori eyed the costume. "I saw a few of your drawing in your notebook and I wanted to support you in any way I could. I modified it a bit for your wings so." "Modified?" How Izuku stared at the back of the jumpsuit. "Mom." "Yes, sweetie," Inko asked as she took a seat next to Toshinori. "There's an opening in the back." Toshinori spat his tea out, his trajectory just shy of the paperwork. "Mom, it'll help your wings," Inko argued, frowning. "You're finding soulmates left and right at your school. Soon your wings will be able to materialize." "What?" Toshinori croaked out, wiping at his mess. "And materialize? Oh, you never told him?" Inko asked as Izuku just continued to stare at his hero costume. Inko smiled and stood up, stepping into a clear area of the living room. "Watch." Izuku looked up as Inko's eyes slipped close. Toshinori's mouth fell open in a gasp as Inko slowly lifted off the ground, floating inches in the air. Her wings flickered into existence before his very eyes, stretched wide to almost touch the surrounding walls. Bells tinkered in the air before she dropped to the ground, opening her eyes back up. They were solid gold. "If we concentrate enough," Inko spoke as she moved to sit back down. Her eyes were green again. Our wings can materialize into the plane where normal humans can see us. That's usually why there are accounts of humans seeing angels in moments of rescue or danger. Toshinori looked at her, looked at Izuku, and then trained his gaze on his tea. Oh, he coughed. So you'll be able to make your wings visible for others. Why the open back then? Not for a long time, Izuku commented with a soft frown. There are requirements that I don't meet currently. There is a bit of discomfort when one materializes their wings onto the mortal plane. Inko spoke with a grimace. The longer you have your wings visible, the more discomfort you feel. Soon it can be painful. The open back is to help that. Oh, Toshinori blinked. But Mom, why? Izuku whined as he flapped the suit out. It's just going to look like a back window to those who can't see my wings. I can't materialize my wings yet. It's the aesthetic. Inko spoke seriously. Mom, Izuku fidgeted as everyone just stared. His back was exposed from the end of his cervical bone to just a few inches below his shoulder blades, giving more than enough room for his tucked wings. The small tufts of feathers clumped at the base of his flesh seemed to shudder at the attention, and Izuku hid his face. To anyone who couldn't see his wings, all they saw were his exposed shoulder blades, littered with tiny freckles. I'm not into dudes, but damn if your back isn't hot, Minta commented loudly, and Izuku flinched, curling into himself further. Izuku's eyes slid to Minta, and his hidden expression pinched sourly at the veil of black that outlined the child. His mother always said that sinners were easy to spot. Their bodies would be cloaked by a thin, almost unnoticeable veil of black. Only the worst of the worst had the veils. Those who raped, or murdered, or committed acts of utter evil. Minta Minoru was cloaked in a thick layer of black, so dense Izuku had been overwhelmed the first time he'd seen it. How could someone so young be so drowned in sins? The faint stench of rotten garbage wafted from him, heavy and retching to Izuku's sensitive senses. Izuku peered into the black, seeing slivers of images raising up like bubbles. Girls shrieking, uncomfortable or scared. Undergarments stolen from them and hidden for pleasure. So much lust, so much indecency. Izuku's wings thrummed and he felt the air around him shift. He'd worry about the sinner later, when there wasn't so many witnesses. Thank-you. Izuku spoke uncertainly, seeing Eda eyeing the short student with something akin to discomfort in his features. Okay, let's go. Izuku gestured to the exit, eyes landing on the small wings stitched into his gloves. Oh, his mother probably had a ball with this. The group walked out towards the training grounds, the girls already there and waiting for them. Mina whistled in appreciation at the boys' costumes, nudging Kirishima with a good-natured smile. He swatted at her and Minta made a weird slurping sound. Wow, Uraraka spoke as she circled Izuku. I like it. Izuku flushed red behind his mask and stammered out a similar reply to her costume. It's kinda puffy, she lamented with a slight frown, but thanks. Uraraka gave similar compliments to Aoyama and Ida, smiling confusedly at Todoroki's ice-coated self. Everyone is looking super. All Might complimented. Congratulations. You've taken your first step at being heroes. Everyone was lined up, waiting for further instructions. All Might studied them, mentally wheezing at Izuku's mask. His hood had 2 ears, looking like rabbit ears, but mostly reminded All Might of his own antennas. Midoriya-san, you must think you are so funny. All Might thought to himself. Now, for today's class, we will be splitting up into heroes and villains and having a 2-on-2 battle. What? Kaminari griped. Is there going to be a threat of expulsion? Uraraka asked softly, huddling into herself in worry. If the class is being split up into 2 groups, what is the best way to go about doing so? Ida asked. Guys, doesn't this cape look killer on me? Aoyama asked his group of new friends. Izuku glanced at the cape and smiled behind his mouth guard. It suits you wonderfully, Aoyama-kun. Izuku spoke, feeling his feather under Aoyama's chestplate. Aoyama's smile faltered at his genuine compliment before his sparkling demeanor seemed to intensify. Guys, one question at a time. All Might called out, looking overwhelmed. Everyone fell silent as he pulled out a small piece of paper, reading off it. For this training, we'll have the villains guard a nuclear weapon. If the heroes capture the villains or stop the device from being set off, they win. If the villains capture the heroes or keep the weapon the entire time, they win. He's reading from a paper, Uraraka whispered to Todoroki, who just nodded silently. As for how we choose the teams, lottery. All Might exclaimed, presenting a box to the students. So lame, they yelled out. Izuku came to his hero's defense, physically feeling the man's heart break at their harsh comment. No, it makes sense, Izuku spoke out, wings beating once. In real-life scenarios, pros are often teamed up out of the blue with other heroes without having prior experience working with them. This gives an authentic simulation to real team-ups. All Might punched the air, looking like he was praying to a higher being at his students' thoughtful save. Now come, take your draws. Izuku and Ochako got paired up. Uraraka cheered and clapped hands with Izuku, beaming as his wings hummed happily. He flushed behind his mask, goggled eyes bouncing over to Ida and Katsuki. He frowned at their tense, distant postures. Yeah, I get to be with Deku-kun. Uraraka giggled. We're Team A, like Angel. Her voice carried over the students and Aoyama gave a agreeing wee. She leaned in close, whispering closely, Ida-kun and that Bakugo kid are Team D like Demon. She snickered as if it were the funniest joke in the world. Wouldn't that be something if we went against each other? Izuku just stared at her, wings drooping down. Uraraka-chan. His voice was light, empty of emotion. Uraraka's mirth fell flat. Please never joke about demons, or Kaken being one. He ducked his head closer to her. Please. Uraraka blinked rapidly. I'm sorry. Izuku shook his head and patted her shoulder. Now, All Might called for attention. The first two groups to go are. All Might shot his hands into the boxes and withdrew 2 balls. Team A and D. Izuku's shoulders hunched up. Team A as heroes and Team D as villains. Izuku's stomach dropped, his surroundings falling around him. No, 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 no. His wings gave phantom throbs of pain, lacing up and down the bones and nerves of each and every feather. No, no, no. All Might. Izuku tried to stutter out, but it died on his lips before he could even utter a sound. His ribs were trying to cave into his heart and Katsuki gave a feral growl. He tried to breathe, his throat clogged with a gigantic lump. His breath rattled in his chest, trapped with nowhere to go. Uraraka glanced at him from her peripheral, concern straightening her spine and squaring her shoulders. Deku-kun. Uraraka spoke. She stepped closer, her eyes widening. He was trembling, head ducked down as he muttered to himself. She strained her hearing, trying to pick up what he was saying. Forgive me, Father, for the sin I am about to commit. Forgive me for my wrongdoing. Forgive me for the path I am choosing to take, for the choice I am going to be presented with. Please guide me, this lost one, and punish me as you see fit. Deku-kun. Uraraka reached a hand out, only to draw back when his wings snapped out at full span, casting shadows over him as he lifted his head. Amen, he spoke to himself and they began. So, Jiru spoke as they all clustered up in the basement. Is anyone going to ask about Midoriya's wings? All Might hacked, choking as Todoroki and Aoyama eyed him warily. Oh my god, thank you. Hagakure chimed in. No one was saying anything, so I didn't know if it was some sort of taboo topic. What wings? Minda asked with a frown. He was ignored over the sudden chatter of the rest of the class. No, Ada and them were touching them at lunch yesterday, Kirishima pointed out, jabbing a finger over at the two. And some guy from another class. They're so pretty. Mina cooed. Suyu nodded in agreement, smile wide. They sound nice, Sadu mumbled, and Takoyami gave a caw of his own. Glorious wings. Makes me jealous. The bird-headed student piped in. Aoyama nodded. We were. Pay attention. All Might roared and the students jolted. He rubbed at the back of his head. No talking about other things besides this. He gestured to the monitors and Todoroki's posture relaxed the tiniest bit. Well then, All Might thought to himself as Uraraka and Izuku slipped in through the window. This is weird. Kaken is coming. Izuku spoke and Uraraka barely had time to gasp before Izuku's arms were wrapping around her. His wings spread wide as they avoided an explosion. Izuku pillowed Uraraka as they tumbled to the ground, debris and smoke filling the hallway. Uraraka-chan, you know the plan. Uraraka nodded against his collarbone and looked at him. His eyes were molten gold. Go. Uraraka shot out of his arms, making herself weightless as she bounced off the wall and flew over Katsuki. Katsuki rounded to go after her, only to stiffen as 2 arms latched onto his pulled-back arm. Let go of me, Deku, Katsuki snarled. Izuku clung tighter, eyes squinted up as if he were trying to repress tears. No, Izuku gritted out, ignoring the pinpricks of fire licking up his arms. You little shit. Katsuki whirled, slamming his other arm right into Izuku's face. Izuku stumbled back, wings drooped. Where the fuck did you get that quirk? I'm sorry, Izuku choked out as he pulled himself into a defensive pose. I'm so sorry, father. Pain, pain, pain. It hurt, it hurt, it hurt. Someone was screaming. Was it him? He was screaming, maybe. Either way, it was horrible. It felt like he was being set ablaze from the inside out. Thunderous gongs slammed against his temples, echoing and deafening him. The screams were almost drowned out. Through tear-stained eyes, he saw those wine-colored eyes wide as they stared down at tiny bloody hands, clumped with red-stained feathers. Izuku's eyes blazed molten gold as Katsuki swung at him again. Fight me, Katsuki roared. You lying sack of shit. Katsuki set off an explosion, taking half of Izuku's mask with it. Izuku winced as his skin instantly started healing, his wings tucked up tight behind him. You liar. I'm not a liar. Izuku screamed back as he ducked another fist, tackling Katsuki around the middle. Katsuki held his ground and slammed an elbow down on Izuku's back, hitting one of his wings. Izuku's vision flashed white and he bit his tongue until it bled to stop from screaming out. Bullshit. You're quirkless. Katsuki snarled low as he hit Izuku's wing again. Izuku just clung tighter around him. Where the hell did you get this sudden strength? Huh? Your freaky bullshit could never do that. I can't, Izuku choked out, a trail of blood escaping the corner of his mouth. Kaken, stop. Izuku slammed a fist into Katsuki's stomach, sending the teen stumbling back with a gag. Pain set itself ablaze along his arm, and Izuku bit down on his tongue again as his vision spotted. Bear with it, bear with it, bear with it. Izuku couldn't attack Katsuki. He couldn't. So, Izuku pivoted on his heel and ran. Deku! Katsuki shrieked after him, explosions chasing his heels. Wait, Bakugo don't, was all Izuku heard before his world was set ablaze. Yeah, Uraraka cried out as the entire building shuddered. Deku-kun, static. Uraraka looked over at Ida, who was tense. Are you okay? Ida asked tentatively as the building ceases its shaking. Uraraka nodded, hand moving to her chest, where her feather was hidden against her collarbone. The feather was searing her flesh. Does yours hurt too? Yeah. Uraraka spoke and shook her head. But that's not the issue. Uraraka made herself weightless and launched to the side. Ida rushed after her and she landed sideways on a wall. Still weightless, she shot herself at the weapon like a rubber band, hands outstretched for the device. Close, Ida called, snagging the device before Uraraka could touch it. She tumbled, crashing into the wall with a groan. But not fast enough. Ida, Uraraka whined, only to gasp as her feather suddenly felt like it was on fire. She scrambled, clawing at her suit to take the feather out from her costume. Oh. Ida was no better, flailing as he attempted to dig through his armor, and then the floor was exploding between them. Ida dropped the device and Uraraka shot forward, grabbing it. She made it weightless, clinging to it as it floated in the air. She laughed, only to wince when her feather continued to burn. Katsuki grabbed Izuku up off the ground, using an explosion to gain momentum. Izuku garbled out something before he was slamming down onto his back. Hard. Bile coughed up as stars spotted his vision. You are beneath me, Katsuki snarled as he slammed a boot down on Izuku's chest. I don't care what the fuck you are, you quirkless freak. I am better than you'll ever be. No, Izuku choked out, tears and spit breaking his voice. Kakin, why don't you fight me? Think you're better than me. Katsuki kicked him, sending him rolling away. Well, you winged fuck. I can't. Izuku screamed at the top of his lungs, his wings laying limp against his back. Don't make me. I don't want to. I can't hurt my precious people. Izuku sobbed out. Something in Katsuki snapped and he was on top of Izuku's back before he even realized it, fingers buried in those thrumming feathers. I thought I was a fucking enemy. Deku. His flesh heated up, smoke not from his quirk raising as he wrenched a handful of feathers out of Izuku's wing. Izuku's head snapped up, eyes wide as he screamed. Katsuki flew back as Izuku's wings tucked up and shot open, throwing him off. His hands hurt, the fabric of his gloves melted. Red, angry blister coated the entire surface of his hands, from fingertips to palms. Blood trailed down his wrists when he raised them to study. Izuku slowly raised a trembling arm up, pointing it directly at the ceiling, while Katsuki covered his face as dust and grime rained down on them. Izuku's mangled fingers fell limply to the ground and All Might's voice called for the hero's victory. Katsuki stared at the gaping hole in the ceiling. No fucking way. Deku-kun. Uraraka shrieked as she floated down with Ida hugging her shoulder. They were standing on a chunk of the floor and the two hopped off the moment they were close enough. Deku. A scream ripped through the destroyed building as Izuku curled in on himself, hands clawing desperately at the concrete until his fingertips split open. Uraraka fell back onto her butt, mouth hanging open. Ida fell to his knees with a gasp and Katsuki just stared. It was as if two invisible hands were grabbing at Izuku's wings, twisting them in awkward directions. Two hefty clumps of feathers were shredded from Izuku's wing base before tossed as if whatever entity was grabbing them changed their mind. And then they caught fire, raining down on Izuku as he continued to scream. Izuku clawed desperately at the concrete, legs skidding as he wailed. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It wasn't a language anyone had ever heard, slurred and choked out between shrieking sobs. Izuku hunched, curling tighter into himself as his burning feathers continued to rain down on him. I have wronged you, wronged your precious creations, wronged myself. Want help? Someone help. Uraraka cried out as Katsuki just continued to stare, eyes wide behind his mask as his blistered hands hung forgotten at his side. I have raised hand to my precious person, sought damage based on anger and vile evil in my heart. Izuku's wings flopped down, bloody and mangled like his arm. The building shuddered, the remaining working lights flickering ominously. Punish me for my sins as I have failed you in my role you have given me. Everyone. All Might was hurrying over to them, medical robots speeding behind him. Are you? He stared at Izuku. I don't. He just started screaming. Uraraka cried out, hands covering her mouth. Does anyone know? I beg for forgiveness in your eyes and in the light of your judgment. Izuku's entire body snapped up like a puppet, head tilted back. His eyes were completely gold, no green or black in sight. His wings stretched out, humming loudly enough to cause the gathered people to wince and cover their ears. It sounded shrill, like the highest pitch of a frequency before your ears started bleeding. Amen. The remaining lights in the building shattered and Izuku slumped forward, unconscious. No one spoke. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, curled up under his blankets. His wings throbbed, Inko's hugs and soothing voice useless as the pain tore him up from the inside out. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. You didn't do anything wrong," Inko whispered softly as she continued to cradle him in her lap. "Bakugo was at fault. I thought my precious people can't hurt me," Izuku sobbed out. Inko frowned, looking away from her covered son. "I thought Kaken was my precious person." "He was," Inko whispered softly. "Sometimes, rarely, they can change. The bond can," but Izuku was wailing louder, drowning out her words. Oh sweetie, I'm so sorry," Inko whispered as she just squeezed him tighter. It was something they knew. After meeting their first soulmate outside of their parents, it was something etched into their bones, fused with their blood. It was something ancient, whispered through time in their DNA. It was something they obeyed to a T, lest they suffer the consequences. Do not attack your precious soulmates. Do not forcefully take your grace away. Do not kill your precious soulmates. Do no turn away from God. Do not be punished. It was something they were born knowing, recited it like a nighttime prayer. It was something stitched into their hearts, through their wings, infused in their nerves. It was something they knew. "Are you okay?" Yaoyorozu Momo asked, crouched down next to Todoroki. He was kneeling down, gripping tightly to his shirt front. Aoyama was no better, curled on his side as he made pitiful noises. All Might went to go check on the two teams. "Should I call for?" Todoroki exhaled and slowly loosened his tensed muscles, looking to her. Throughout the exchange, his ice had melted, disappearing into steam into the air. She blinked, leaning away as Todoroki straightened. His eyes moved to the monitors, watching All Might gently lift Izuku up into his arms. He was lowered onto the stretcher, his wings limp limbs under him. "Aoyama-san?" Hagakure asked, her gloved hands waving over the blonde teen. "Are you okay too?" "What happened?" Aoyama slowly uncurled, sitting up with a wheeze. "That hurt," Aoyama spoke, his own eyes trained on the monitors. "Oh my." The rest of the class just stared at the aftermath of the battle, taking in the destroyed building and the ashes scattered on the ground. What are those squiggles?" "They look like some sort of set of symbols," Momo stated as they all took in the sight before them. "They're repeating." Black blocky symbols were scorched into the ground around where Izuku had been curled up, circling like a protective barrier. The symbols repeated through the ashes of the burnt feathers, marking the cracked concrete. "What do you think it is?" Kaminari asked, rubbing at the back of his neck as goosebumps raced up his arms. On the monitor, Ida was tracing the scorched mark, head turned to Uraraka, who looked pale even behind her visor. "What are you guys talking about?" Minta cried out, only to be, again, ignored. Izuku's eyes were closed 1 second, open the next. Those flecks of gold nearly swallowed against the black of his pupils. A off-white ceiling faced him, small spots of gray decorating the surface. He was laying on something soft, most likely a bed. He could hear talking. Tashinori's soft murmurs drowned out by elderly woman's sharp chiding. The child's arm is broken and he had severe bruising to his torso and ribs. "Why didn't you step in sooner?" The woman snapped out and Tashinori answered in a stuttered, "Well, you see." Izuku sat up, his limbs protesting. His muscles were stiff, tense and taut against his bones. He looked down at his casted arm, raising an eyebrow at it. Tapping the plaster, he felt his grace work to speed up the recovery. It was lethargic at best, his mind sluggish and not responding as fast as it should have. His fingertips were red and glossy, new skin growing at a snail's pace. His wings. Izuku closed his eyes as he stretched his wings out, the bones and tendons screaming in agony as he stretched them out to their full length. He turned, staring at them over his shoulder. A notable chunk of his feathers were missing, his color tainted by ashy spots to mark his punishment. He furled them up against his back, exhaling softly as the searing pain dimmed to a throb. He knew how to speed up the healing process. His mother had done it too many times for him to not remember. It was just a matter of working up the courage to do so. He couldn't wait until he got home. That was too far of a trip to be in pain for. Making up his mind, Izuku peeked out to see Tashinori being chided by Recovery Girl. All Might. Both adults whipped their heads in his direction. Tashinori's eyes lit while Recovery Girl's grew glossy. "Midoriya, how are you feeling?" Tashinori walked over to Izuku, stopping in front of him. Izuku looked up at him, feeling his wing pulsating from the man's pocket. "Tired," was all he said before he stepped around the teacher. "I'm going to go change." Tashinori watched, perplexed, as the teen left the clinic. He didn't stop him, feeling that nothing he could say or do would make the child feel better. His eyes trailed to those damaged wings and he frowned. "Recovery Will, are you all right?" Tashinori jolted as he caught sight of Recovery Girl's slacked, dead expression. "Recovery Girl? What?" Recovery Girl shook herself out of her daze, blinking rapidly as if chasing stars from her eyes. What happened? Are you okay?" Tashinori worried and Recovery Girl rubbed at her forehead, nodding slowly. Yes, I just get lost in my thoughts. Was thinking of the time I smuggled beer during middle school. Recovery girl, Toshinori admonished, and the older woman gave a soft giggle. Her expression softened as she studied him. Your color is looking better, she spoke, and Toshinori stiffened. You're getting some weight back on your bones, too. Reminds me of your younger days. I don't know how to explain it to you, to be honest, Toshinori spoke softly. I passed on my quirk to Midoriya-kun, as you know. Recovery girl nodded, patiently waiting for the man to continue. You've probably noticed, but I can last longer in my other form. Twam healing. What? Recovery girl spoke. Toshinori, that's impossible. There is no way that can be. You'd need a miracle for that to happen. Toshinori changed a glance at the door before slipping his suit off, letting it pool at his waist as he showed his healed sign to the woman. She stared. Midoriya is my miracle, Toshinori spoke softly. You can't say anything to anyone, understand? I'm only telling you because you've done so much for me and him already. Put your suit back on before you catch a cold, Recovery girl snapped. She turned, scribbling in her notebook. Does the principal know? Yes, Toshinori sighed out as he adjusted the baggy spandex over his shoulders, as well as my closest personal friends. I couldn't keep it a secret. They noticed, just like you. She nodded, placing her pen down. Well, thank God then that you're going to be with us for a little while longer. You better never come in here for anything short of a paper cut, you hear me? Recovery girl waved her cane threateningly and Toshinori stepped back, chuckling lightly. Yes, I hear you, he spoke as she lowered her cane. He never knew an elderly woman to be menacing, but Recovery girl pulled it off flawlessly while still looking ready to offer you a hard candy or a cookie. It was terrifying. I'll be leaving now. Toshinori's body doubled until All Might was making a break for it. Izuku trudged down the hallway, intent on heading back to class. Was his bag there? Was it still in the changing room? Would he have to walk back that way? His wings weighed heavily against him, as if shards of glass had replaced his feathers and were cutting into his flesh and muscles with each footfall. Izuku felt a familiar feather and looked up, seeing Katsuki stomping his way out the building exit. Kakin, Izuku cried out, ignoring the stabbing pain in his face as he rushed after the blonde. Katsuki's shoulders hunched up and he whirled with a scowl, his expression softening just the tiny bit at the sight of Izuku's body. What? Katsuki asked, hands shoved in his pockets. Izuku could feel the pain radiating off the taller teen, his feather pulsating against the boy's chest as it tried to heal him. Izuku's wings drooped down at the reminder he'd hurt his precious person, no matter what their bond thought. I have one thing to tell you, Izuku whispered out, hands trembling as he clasped them in front of his chest. Katsuki turned fully to him, silent as he waited for Izuku to speak. Izuku sucked in a breath, puffed out his chest for courage, and spoke, I received my quirk from someone else. What? Katsuki's voice was a dark snarl, shadows crossing his features. I can't tell you who, but I'm not lying to you. Up until half a year ago, I was quirkless. You know I couldn't have a quirk. My mom showed you my medical records. Izuku looked down, away from Katsuki. I can't control this quirk yet. It's conflicting with my grace. It's a borrowed power and... Katsuki advanced on him and Izuku shrunk back, arms coming up to protect himself. Katsuki stopped short, leaning in close. You aren't lying. His expression was pinched, watching those battered arms slowly lower. I can't lie, Izuku whispered, peering up into Katsuki's eyes. Katsuki's expression shuddered for a moment before he ducked his head. Kakin, it doesn't matter where you got that power from, Katsuki spat out, glaring up at Izuku from his bangs. You beat me, even with something you can't control. You smited down your demon. Katsuki whirled, ready to leave. Izuku reeled back as if struck, eyes widening. No, he screamed and lurched forward, grabbing Katsuki's arm. Deku, Katsuki snarled, but Izuku hugged onto his arm tighter, squeezing as his wings forced themselves out. Katsuki stilled. You are not a demon. You are not an enemy. You are my precious person. Izuku choked out as white-hot pain laced through his wings as they fluttered in indigitation. Your bond can't change how I think of you. Katsuki's shoulders hunched up as he tried to pry Izuku off him. Get off, Deku. His voice cracked, his grip weak as he dug his fingers into Izuku's shoulder. God damn it. With that fucking frozen bastard and that chick, gotta fucking. Don't use his name in vain, Izuku mumbled out as Katsuki leaned closer, resting his forehead on Izuku's shoulder. Everyone's looking down on me, Katsuki gritted out, wet spots patching along Izuku's shoulder. Everyone's acting like they're better than me. I'm going to show them. I'm going to surpass everyone. Even you. Katsuki squeezed at Izuku's shoulders, breathing deep as he tried to collect himself. Fucking Deku. You did that on purpose. Did what? Izuku whispered as he tilted his head down, lips brushing against Katsuki's hair in a gesture of comfort. Not wearing your glasses, Katsuki huffed out as he pulled away, wiping at his eyes. Izuku's eyes widened slightly as he raised a hand to his face. Oh no, Izuku wheezed out as Katsuki stepped backwards from the angelic teen. My eyes. He tried hiding his face, failing with one good hand being his only means of coverage. I'm so sorry. Whatever. Don't think we're good or anything. Katsuki snapped out as he turned away. I'm going to surpass you too. This doesn't change anything. Katsuki stomped away, leaving Izuku to stare at his retreating back. His wings pulled, burning, as they tucked back up against him. Kaken, Izuku whispered softly before he pivoted on his heel, rushing back into the school building. He had to find his glasses. The walk to the classroom was interrupted by Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, and Aoyama bustling around a corner, looking concerned. Deku-kun, Uraraka greeted, sounding winded. We were just on our way to go see you. Uraraka checked him over, eyebrows pinching up at his cast-covered arm and his tight wings. Are you? Izuku threw himself at her, wrapping his good arm around her. Uraraka stiffened, hands poised in the air, as Izuku nuzzled into her shoulder. Ida chopped his hand mutely, mouth opening and closing without uttering a single sound. Todoroki's eyebrows shot up and Aoyama's smile widened. Deku-kun, Uraraka squeaked out and Izuku tightened his grip on her. I'm healing, was whispered softly into her shoulder and Ida's glasses slid down his nose. Just give me a moment, please. They watched as his wings began glowing and Izuku's body sagged with his exhale. You're healing? Uraraka asked as those wings shook. Izuku flinched and nodded against her. My bond with my precious people also acts to heal my wings, Izuku explained and jolted when he felt arms wrap around his side. He peeked out from Uraraka's neck to see Aoyama looking like he was in his element, snuggling up to the two. So by holding physical contact with us, your wings will, essentially, heal. Ida spoke as Todoroki stared at if he were internally battling himself. Izuku nodded and Ida joined in the hug, squeezing Izuku and Uraraka to his chest. Uraraka giggled into Izuku's hair. And the three soulmates stared at Todoroki. Join us, Todoroki-kun, Uraraka spoke slowly, tone off-putting as Aoyama smiled widely at the teen. Todoroki wavered, his eyes sliding over to Izuku's wings. His feathers were smoothing out, the frayed or charred feathers slowly peeling into perfectly new feathers, no blemishes in sight. He remembered the pain the feather caused him, wondering just how painful it had been for the angelic teen then. Todoroki exhaled loudly and hesitantly stepped over, pressing between Uraraka and Ida to join their hug cluster. Thank you, Izuku whispered as he closed his eyes, feeling their feathers pulse in response. No one spoke. Izuku slid the classroom door open, Uraraka humming behind him as they all bustled into the classroom. After their hug fest, Todoroki had explained that his backpack had been moved to the classroom, since they didn't know what to do with it after he'd been taken to the clinic. Keeping his eyes downcasted, Izuku attempted to make a beeline to his desk, attempted being the key word, as the moment he stepped fully into the classroom, he was accosted from all sides. Hey, Kirishima called out, immediately in his face. Izuku stumbled backwards into Aoyama, eyes wide. You were so manly. Are your wings okay, though? Every thought in Izuku's mind caught fire and died a painful, ashy death that left him choking out a slurred, at the redhead. Kirishima's eyebrow quirked up, amused, as Izuku stared. By my wings, Izuku choked out, Uraraka and Todoroki slipping around him to go to his desk. Kaminari and Jiru flanked Kirishima, leaning in close. You can see my wings. The entire class seemed to fall silent at that, staring curiously at the teen. Ida pushed his glasses up, looking uncomfortable by the tense, focused air. What do you mean, can we see them? They're right there, Momo pointed out, gesturing to his wings. They look wounded. Recovery girl couldn't heal them. She squinted, lips pursing out. Actually, they look a bit better than during the trial. They can all see them. Todoroki spoke as he walked over, Izuku's bag in hand. Besides mine to San. Izuku's eyes flashed over the students, not spotting the sinner. Izuku took his bag, fishing for his glasses. Spotting them, he slipped them on without a second thought, exhaling as he looked back at the students. All of you can see these? Izuku asked, jerking a thumb at his wings. The remaining students nodded. Why couldn't we? It was Shoji Mizo who asked, one of his arms shaped into a mouth and turned towards Izuku. About your wings, Takoyami Fumikage spoke up, beak clicking sharply. Are they transparent or do they not abide by the laws of the mortal plane due to your ethereal presence? In English, please, Mina piped up. Takoyami looked flustered, beak clicking again. They phase through stuff, Ida commented. Because they aren't a part of his quirk. Izuku jolted as eyes turned to him. Curious and studious, not a part of a quirk, Ajiro Mashurao echoed, eyeing his wings as he stroked his tail. How? The classroom door opened again, Aizawa and All Might blinking at the clustered students. School's over, Aizawa gruffed out. Why are you still here? Go home. Get out of here. Leave. He made shooing motions, as if trying to scare away a wandering dog or bird. Takoyami gave an indigent huff. Sorry, Aizawa-sensei. Hagakure called out, uniform flailing as she moved her body. We were talking to Midoriya-kun about his wings. Aizawa's eyes snapped down to Izuku's wings, All Might tensing behind him. His wings, Aizawa drawled out, leaning against the doorframe. What about? They aren't a part of a quirk. Izuku finally sighed out, shoulders slumping as he moved to let the two adults into the classroom. Aizawa's other eyebrow raised up. I understand that people's appearances look different in ways that have nothing to do with their quirk, Aizawa commented as he gestured to Mina and Takoyami, but your wings aren't part of a quirk. Izuku repeated with a firm nod of his head. Deku-kun's our guardian's angel, Hiraraka blurted out, hopping up and down. Izuku stared at her as if she'd just spoke sins against All Might. He says he's our angel. Izuku shot a look at the teachers and watched as All Might sent an inconspicuous wink over Aizawa's shoulder towards him. Angel, Aizawa spoke slowly, eyes sliding over to All Might. What do you think of that? What wings are you talking about? All Might lied, head tilted to the side. What are you guys talking about? Some new game. Izuku bit his tongue, stopping himself from chiding the hero on lie. It made sense when he thought about it. Think of the rumors, or the news, if people found out All Might was one of his soulmates. It'd ruin the man's reputation, bring in speculations to Izuku's acquired quirk, raise questions. Aizawa pointed to Izuku's wings. Izuku's stained glass, bell-chiming wings that tucked up and brushed against his tailbone. Those wings, Aizawa stated, tone showing his thinning patience. I don't see any wings. Is this a new form of hazing? All Might chuckled nervously. Kids, you shouldn't bully your teachers. He wagged a finger. Though I am surprised you got Aizawa to join in on your joke. But they're right there, Mina loudly proclaimed, marking over. Right here her hands touched the wings and she fell silent. Izuku sucked in a deep breath and his wings hummed, glowing just the tiniest bit. Whoa, right, Hiraraka chirped out, bouncing her way over. Deku-kun. Deku hunched his shoulders up, burying his face into his hands. If you can see my wings, please just touch them, he muffled out, body language conveying his exhaustion. Might as well get it over with. His mother was going to have a field day when he got home. Heads turned. Silent nudges passed between the teenagers as they waited to see who else would move. We just touched them, right? It was Kaminari, shuffling closer. He reached out, stroking down one of Izuku's wings. They hummed again, the music traveling across the classroom as sparks danced around Kaminari. What the? Me next. Hagakure squealed out, shoving Kaminari out of the way. Izuku felt her hands on his wings and she gave a breathless little giggle as she let go. One by one, the students closed in, each taking a moment to touch his wings. With each touch, each hum of his wings, they glowed, the ashy spots fading into nothing. They stretched out, inch by inch, the missing feathers growing back at an agonizingly slow pace until the tips of his wings brushed against the back of his calves. No one spoke. You aren't seeing this. Aizawa finally broke the silence, gesturing to Izuku's wings. His wings are glowing, and making noise, and are glowing. You don't see this. All Might tentatively shook his head, smile strained. Aizawa gave an audible groan and threw his hands out as if to give up hope in humanity. He stepped closer. Just touch it. Aizawa cautiously reached out. Izuku, face still covered by his hands, nodded. Aizawa touched them and then jerked back, eyes. What the hell, Midoriya? You alright, Aizawa? All Might asked gently and Aizawa shot him a suspicious glare. Welcome to the club. Hiraraka cheered out, clapping her hands in delight. Deku-kun gave us feathers, right guys? Hiraraka pulled hers out, showing it off. Ida slowly did the same, Aoyama and Todoroki following suit. So, Izuku wheezed out, dropping his hands. Hi. All Might. Do you mind? Izuku's eyes slid to All Might, who gave a thumbs up. I must leave. Duty calls. All Might laughed out and disappeared, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Izuku fidgeted. Normal people can't see my wings. Like All Might? Aizawa asked, arms crossed. Izuku bobbed his head in confirmation and Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose. Okay, let me sit down. The students parted as their teacher moved, perching himself on the edge of a desk. Okay, explain. Do you believe in angels? Izuku started, knowing he was going to be there for a while. Did you see that? All Might's a teacher now. The sounds of glass clinking together echoed in darkened bar, shadows wisping through the air as a fog-like hand ran a rag over the polished countertop. I wonder, a gravelly voice said, words cracked and choked out as if the person rarely ever spoke, how the world would respond to their symbol of peace being snuffed out by the villains. Shadows stretched across the floors in the dim lighting, twisting the figures' bodies into lanky, skeletal mockeries of their actual bodies. I've decided. That gravelly voice sounded once more. I think I'm going to take a field trip. Be safe. The one who seemed to be made of wisping smoke responded without missing a beat. Don't cause too much trouble. So you're an angel. Aizawa just stared. An angel. Izuku nodded, kicking his feet. He'd ended up on a desktop, his feathers distributed out to the classmates and teacher. They all seemed entranced by the pulsing feathers, tuned out to Aizawa's words. You understand that this is kind of far-fetched. A quirk, I would understand, but you saw my memories. Izuku spoke softly, head tilted to the side as he basked in his soulmate's presence. You need more proof. Aizawa studied him, eyes narrowed. His arms were crossed, grip loose on his feather as he observed the student. So your quirk has nothing to do with this, Izuku reassured. They are two completely separate things. You may reject my grace if you want. Izuku swallowed. Aizawa blinked once, slow. Your grace is your soul piece, right? It's what creates the bond between us. Aizawa questioned, eyes slowly dying as he took the info in. He needed a nap, or 7, or maybe even a job transfer. He should have just expelled the entire class again, like the last few years. Damn his aging mind. The coffee was finally catching up. Yes, Izuku spoke with a nod. If you decide to return my grace. Izuku looked down, wings folding over himself like a protective hug. I completely understand. Not everyone can be accepting of these sort of things. Bye-bye, Midoriya. Hiroshima called out as he moved to the door, Mina and Kaminari behind him. See you tomorrow. Zero and Hagakure waved furiously at him as they followed out, the classroom clearing until only Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki were remaining. Uraraka plopped down next to Izuku, beaming as Ida chided the two for sitting on the desks, Todoroki pulling his chair out to sit down. You said you can't feel pain. Aizawa inquired as Uraraka began to fiddle with Izuku's feathers, tucking them or combing them out. Izuku let her, expression serene as he blinked back at his teacher. Not in the normal sense, no. I feel pain, just on a more spiritual level. I feel my soulmate's pain. I feel pain from my wings. Izuku looked at his plaster-coated arm and waved it slightly. But things like this, I don't feel. My grace heals the pain the moment it is inflicted, so I don't feel it ever. That's what I thought. It was mumbled, gritted out in utter exasperation. Aizawa's eyes were narrowed, lips twisted into a scowl that he gave Izuku a once-over. If I don't keep an eye on you, who will? You'll have no arms by the end of the year if you keep this up. Not true, Izuku tried to object, only to shrink back when Ada sent him a look that clearly read, boy. Izuku gave a sheep's smile, twisting a curl around his finger. My grace would heal me. It didn't when you fought Bakugo, Todoroki piped up. You were all mangled still. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, nodding slowly. Todoroki is right. What was that? All Might showed me the video recordings of all the battles. Your wings. Izuku fidgeted, dropping his hands to his lap. As I explained, I have 2 sets of soulmates. Izuku raised 2 fingers. My precious people. Izuku lowered his middle finger. And my beloved enemies. Izuku lowered his index finger. My beloved enemies are those who I am allowed to face in battles without the consequences of punishment. If I hurt a precious person, well, you saw it. Bakugo is a precious person. Uraraka blinked, eyebrows furrowing. His hands were hurt from touching your wings, though. How comes ours doesn't do that? Was it because he hurt you? Izuku shook his head, looking down with a sad smile. I consider Kaken a precious person, Izuku softly explained. He, however, does not. Due to events in our past, our bond shifted and broke in the middle. He sees us as enemies, hence his hands burning whenever he touches my feathers, and I consider him a precious person, which is why I was punished for attacking him. Will you be punished every single time you face a precious person? Aizawa asked, leaning further against the podium. Because if so, that'll hinder you during classes when you need to spar against other students. We can't give you special treatment. I will discuss it with my mother. I've seen her get into fights with her precious people before and she wasn't punished. Izuku cut in, shifting on the desk. This will not hinder me. So all of your enemies would be hurt if they touched you? Ida asked, pushing up his glasses with a frown. Is it because your wings act as a protective barrier to you? I noticed that Aizawa-sensei's bandages didn't affect you. It was like your wings repelled them. Ah, my wings protect me from attacks by my soulmates, if they are precious people. Izuku picked at his blazer hem, having changed back into his school uniforms. My feathers do the same, to a certain extent, except that they protect you all from weak attacks as well. That's why Aizawa-sensei's bandages didn't work. But if they are normal people or your enemies Aizawa's nose scrunched up, then they can hurt you. Izuku nodded and the man sighed, pushing his hair back as he looked to the ceiling. Midoriya, I have a feeling I'm going to gain a permanent headache with you around. I'm sorry, Izuku mumbled, wings drooping down. Thank you for believing me. From what my mother told me, most cases she's seen as crazy until she performs some act of miracle. You can perform acts of miracles? Todoroki asked, leaning forward. Like what? Uraraka, Ida, and Aizawa waited for an answer, looking just as curious. Izuku flushed, his freckles standing more prominent. I can't do much right now. Mostly use my grace to heal people, such as broken bones, lost vision, healing entire organs. Izuku looked away from them. But it is a slow and tedious process that requires a lot of patience. Is it anyone, or just your soulmates, that have these miracles granted to them? Ida asked, hands clasped together in front of him. Soulmates. Some angels go outside of their precious people to heal those in times of need, such as after a natural disaster or illness. Those are usually the ones who are recorded in stories or old tales, Izuku explained promptly, tone matter of fact. Wow, Uraraka breathed out. Just wow. Izuku pointedly looked at the floor and gave a half-hearted hum. Aizawa sighed and ran a hand through his hair again. I think that's enough for one day. Go home, all of you. Aizawa stood straight, walking to the classroom. He paused. Everyone in the class is your soulmate in some way. Izuku looked up, eyes glinting gold for a brief moment. Not everyone, Izuku clarified and slipped off the desk. But that's not a concern right now. Todoroki-kun, would you like to walk home with us? He turned to Todoroki, who paused in standing from the desk. Todoroki surveyed the clustered group and thinned out his lips. If it isn't a bother, yes please. The teenager spoke and Izuku's expression brightened. He smiled, his wings fluttering happily against his back. No problem at all. I was hoping we could talk on the way home. Izuku reached over the desk, grasping Todoroki's wrist. Let's go. Sorry Deku-kun. Uraraka spoke with an apologetic smile. I have to do something after school. I'm meeting my mom at a store. I'll see you tomorrow. Uraraka gave a salute and was gone, departing with a bow and a wave. Aizawa leaned against the wall as Izuku and Todoroki left, both bidding him farewell. The walk off campus was silent, Izuku still holding on to Todoroki's wrist. Todoroki looked down at the hand gripping him, feeling the warmth radiating off his left arm. Izuku wasn't saying anything about it, looking content as his wings made musical melodies in the breeze. I would like for you to move out of your house. Todoroki nearly stumbled, eyes wide as he shot a look at the back of Izuku's head. Izuku continued facing forward, dropping Todoroki's wrist to clasp his hands behind his back. What did you just say? Something bitter and rotten crawled up his throat and settled in the back of his tongue. Black tar bubbled up, only to freeze over in the pit of his stomach and weighed him down as he stopped walking. Repeat that. Izuku turned when he heard Todoroki's steps halt, eyebrows shooting up at the open expression on contempt on the teen's face. Todoroki-kun, how can you say that? Todoroki demanded, taking a step forward as his voice raised slightly. You don't know anything. Todoroki's thoughts were in turmoil. Izuku didn't know anything. Izuku didn't understand anything. Nothing about him or his home life. I've seen your... So what? Todoroki seethed out in a low hiss. So what if you've seen a few memories? I'm fine, Midoriya. I'm fine. He was fine, even when each trip back there felt like he was walking to the noose that'd steal his breath. He was fine, even when his sister had to shoo him away until his father left the area. He was fine, even when he'd never associated that building with home, that man as a parent, or adults equaled safety. He was fine. Todoroki-kun, Izuku whispered out, eyebrows lowering in pain. Why do you continue going back there? You and your siblings can stay with my mother or me until... The fact you have to ask shows you know nothing. Todoroki cut him off, turning his mismatched gaze away. Two have to stay there, because if he left, who would his mother come back for? If he disappeared, finally gathered up the courage to take what he could call his own and leave, who would protect his mother? When she finally came back, she would expect him to be there to greet her. She would welcome him with open arms and he'd never have to suffer under his father again. He hoped. He wished desperately. He needed to believe. A gentle hand cupped his scarred cheek and Todoroki flinched back, eyes wide as he stared into green and gold eyes. Izuku was in his space, barely giving him any breathing room. Todoroki was petrified, pinned down by those gold-ringed eyes that stilled him with unmovable weight. Izuku tucked his red hair back behind his ear, gaze narrowing as he watched the teen's expression for something. Anything, everything. I can't force you to leave, only ask, Izuku spoke as he dropped his hand. Todoroki was quick to comb his hair back over his cheek, eyes diverted. But if that is what you wish, then I can only accept it. However, Todoroki looked back into those eyes and a shudder overtook him as seeing pure gold. Those black irises slitted like a cat's when they were about to pounce on their vulnerable prey. If that man who is supposed to be your guardian ever raises a hand to you again, I will intervene and I will take you and your siblings from that house. Why? Todoroki whispered as Izuku turned back around, resuming his walk. Why? Because, Izuku spoke and his wings shimmered in the afternoon light. I protect my precious people. Todoroki watched his back, taking in the straight lines of determination, the warmth of his wings as they stretched out, and his sure steps as he continued forward and swiftly wiped at his burning eyes. They were strangers. Todoroki spoke as he stretched his legs to catch up with Izuku. Izuku sent him a bemused expression, eyes back to normal. Maybe to you. The moment you formed a bond with me cemented my protection over you. Angels are very protective of what's theirs, Todoroki-kun. As love flows through us too, you know. Izuku smiled brightly and skipped forward, humming. Oh, was all Todoroki could say, and Izuku's wind chime giggles filled the air. Izuku, and Ko spoke the moment Izuku slipped his shoes off. What happened to you today? Your wings were hurt. Izuku grimaced and peered up at his mother as she worried at her bottom lip, eyebrows furrowed. Kakin and I got a little heated in our class today. Izuku mumbled as he stepped out of the entryway, rubbing at his arm. I was punished. Inko's eyes flew to his eyes, racking up and down them as she inspected their condition. But in a weird, but probably purposeful twist, almost all of my classmates are soulmates. I can't see that. Inko leaned closer, eyes squinting as she peered closer at the wings. Are you alright? I was punished, Izuku repeated. I'm not supposed to be alright. I wronged Kakin and myself. Izuku dragged himself into the living room, falling face first onto the couch. How did you get away with brawling with your soulmates? I know you'd have fistfights with Auntie in your youth. In my youth, Izuku. Inko's worry turned to exasperation as she tossed a small pillow at him. I am not old. Izuku giggled into the pillow, hugging it to his chest. Inko settled down at the end of the couch and Izuku slid up to rest his head on her lap. She stroked her fingers through his hair, humming in thought. It's all about intent. Intent. Izuku echoed out and Inko nodded. She ran her thumb over his cheek, gaze tender as he peered up at her from his peripheral. What do you mean? The punishment comes into play when you have the intent to actually cause bodily harm to your precious ones, Inko explained softly. If you were punished, it's because you had the actual motivation to hurt Katsuki-kun. Izuku's eyes widened, shooting up from her lap. No, I would never. Izuku, it's fine. It happens. The first time I met your father, our bond were just like yours and Katsuki-kun's right now. He considered us enemies. I considered us precious people. Anytime we came to blows, I'd be punished, same as him. Inko sighed as she stared off into space, losing herself to nostalgia. After a while, I learned if I faced him without the intent of causing him pain and harm when we'd fight, I wouldn't be punished. So the reason I was punished was because I had an actual thought to hurt Kakin. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale as he looked down at his hands. But, it's fine, sweetie, honest. But I understand you'll need to spar with your classmates, right? Inko waited for her son to nod before she smiled gently. When you spar, just remember that you aren't hurting them. That this is nothing but a harmless, innocent task set up to further strengthen them. Understand? Izuku hesitantly nodded and Inko reached over, ruffling his curls. Good. Now, I'll make some chicken katsu for dinner as celebration on your new soulmates. Ah, look at your wings. Inko smoothed a hand down his wings, beaming proudly. Almost there, sweetie. Izuku nodded and face planted against the couch once more once Inko moved to the kitchen. Hey mom, Izuku called, popping back up to watch his mother. I have a sinner in my class. Inko paused in pulling out the panko crumbs, looking over her shoulder at her child. He isn't a soulmate but his veil is pretty thick. How thick? Inko asked as she resumed gathering up the ingredients for dinner. Izuku nibbled on the skin of his lip, tilting his head to the side. I was almost sick the first time I saw him. Inko gave a worried little trill in her throat, her wings fluttering at the thought. He's just so young so. If you don't save him soon, his soul will be eaten by a demon. Inko spoke softly, head lowered. Oh, for a child to be a sinner. Izuku hunkered back down against the couch, curling into himself as he closed his eyes. He drifted off to the noise of his mother's wings lulling him to sleep with their tinkering chimes. The sun hadn't even risen up yet, the sky still bathed in navy. The stars twinkled their final moments of visibility, the air crisp in the morning breeze. Izuku sat, perched on the towering stone fencing outside of the old Western-styled church hidden in the corner of the city, 3 blocks from the local shrine and 7 from Minta Minoru's house. His feet swung back and forth lazily, idly watching the sky's hues slowly lighten as the sun began its slow ascent into the sky. He hummed softly, his moving in small patters of words. Behold, behold, the wood of the cross. Izuku sung quietly, his voice dying in the silent air of the dawn, on which is hung our salvation. Come, let us adore. Izuku's eyes slipped closed, senses expanding to feel the thick sludge-like texture rolling off mind. He seemed to be awake, getting ready for the day. The black veil swarmed his tiny body like a wave crashing into an unsuspecting toddler, swallowing him whole. His eyes opened back up, green with fragmented gold gleaming. He leapt off the wall, wings catching on the air and slowing his descent down until he touched the ground with the faintest of sounds. His wings shook out, ruffled from the sudden coast, and straightened back out against him. Humming still, Izuku made his way towards Minta's house. Minta barely got a block away from his house when he ran into Izuku. Quite literally, Minta stumbled back, a swear on his tongue, when he froze. I'm so sorry, Izuku apologized, bending down until he was eye to eye with the shorter teenager. Are you alright, Minta-kun? Minta's mouth opened, gaze fogging over as he stared into those memorizing gold eyes of his classmate. I'm okay, Minta stuttered out, entranced by the view of his classmate's face without glasses on. Without the ugly, blocky spectacles, his face looked almost delicate in a way that made Minta mentally whine about Izuku being born the wrong gender. Oh, thank goodness. I didn't want to hurt you. Izuku maintained eyesight with Minta, raising a hand to brush his bangs out of his face. Minta watched, unable to look away from those eyes. There was something about Izuku in that moment that all but compelled Minta to spill his dirtiest secrets. Maybe it was his gentle, non-judgmental expression, or the soft, welcoming gaze of those gorgeous eyes. Maybe it was his voice, so tender and musical to his ears that lowered his guard like his mother's would when she knew he was lying. Whatever the reason may be, Minta couldn't stop himself from opening his mouth. "I'm not a good person." Minta's cheeks heated in shame. Why did he say that? Why would he admit something like that to his schoolmate, who he barely even held a conversation with? "Why would you say that about yourself?" Izuku asked softly, hands clasped in front of him. "What makes you think that?" I make girls uncomfortable," Minta whispered out, shoulders lowering as he continued to maintain eye contact with Izuku. "I make suggestive comments to them or about them. I secretly take photos of them too." Minta's eyes watered, still unable to look away. Minta sniffled. "How?" Izuku asked, innocent and patient, waiting for Minta to spill his heart out. "What type of comments do you make about them?" Something about Izuku reverberated safely to Minta, like nothing he could say would leave a blemish on the teen's impression of him. That something urged Minta to continue, to spill everything he could, to spill every tiny speck of black in his heart, to this teen who was so kind as to listen to him. Minta inhaled. "I consider them my fap material." It was whispered, like he was sharing a secret that no one else could know. "I use their pictures to get off. When I touch myself, I think of their reactions, how they'd see me." Really, there was nothing in his tone. No disgust, no interest, nothing. He just said the word, opened Minta up to share more. "What else?" "I creep into their changing rooms and steal their bras and panties," Minta continued, drowning in that gold. It was filling his senses, twisting him up and wringing him out like a damp towel. "I'll sniff them when I masturbate." And the corner of his vision was dying in that gold, his body slowly feeling lighter. Izuku kept silent, focusing the grace in his eyes to continue to lull Minta into a sense of security. His eyes worked similar to that of a confession box in a church, urging those to spill their sins and beg for forgiveness. When not hindered by his thick, ugly glasses, his eyes were literal windows into people's souls. "I like big-breasted women," Minta said abruptly. "I just want to smother my face into them and suffocate while jerking off against the women." Izuku inwardly screeched to the heavens, uncomfortable with graphic details in which the teenager was sharing. But as he watched, that veil of black was slowly, ever so slowly, thinning out. "Go big or go home, am I right?" Minta laughed weakly, trying to lighten the mood. His humor fell flat as Izuku's expression remained unchanging. "I'm the human personification of rotting garbage. Why do you think that about yourself?" Izuku encouraged. "I creep on women in bathhouses, film my neighbor across the street when she dresses." Minta gave a proud, lecherous smile. "I've even scaled the walls to public bathhouses to peep." "I see." Izuku peered down at the short teen, wondering how many moments of class had been spent eyeing the girls in their class. His precious ones. Izuku's eyes hardened and Minta gave a soft whimper. His wings shuddered. Not that Minta could see, and the air got just the tiniest bit heavier. "Minta-kun, this isn't good." Izuku spoke softly, lowering his hands onto his lap. "Your soul's bound to be eaten by a demon at this rate." Minta paled, his breath coming out in a feeble wheeze. What? Minta choked out, new tears forming. "The demons. I don't want my soul to be eaten." Izuku inwardly smiled, pleased with the teen's faith despite having no proof. He would work with this. Fear made one believe anything, after all. "Hush," Izuku soothed, keeping his hands firmly clasped as he smiled brightly. "Do not cry, my child, for he will forgive you if you atone." Minta wiped at his wet face, peering up at Izuku hopefully. "Atone," Minta spoke and Izuku nodded, standing up. "Yes, it's quite simple." Izuku smiled welcomingly. "Listen to me." His wings stretched out, catching on the rising sun and casting shadows over the two. Izuku slid into his seat moments before the bell rang. He hummed softly, finger tapping against the corner of his glasses as he smiled triumphantly to himself. Katsuki's eyes wouldn't leave his wings, eyes wide as his mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Finally, your fucking wings," Katsuki exploded, slamming a hand on his desk with a small explosion. Mina and Kaminari squeaked as Katsuki shot from his seat, pointing at Izuku. "What the fuck no?" He swept his eyes across the classroom, eyebrows raising. "No wait, no goddamn way. Don't say God's name in vain." Izuku reminded for the nth time, expression unchanging from its bright demeanor. "Why are you so surprised, Kakin?" Katsuki snarled, eyes narrowed. Everyone was watching the two, wary and tensed. Katsuki sat back down with a huff, crossing his arms over his desk. 1 minute later Aizawa came in, looking exhausted. "Class, I'm sorry to say that Minta Minoru will no longer be joining us in the heroics department. He has withdrawn from UA, and will be pursuing his education at a Catholic school overseas." Many eyes found Izuku, who continued to look utterly content with himself. As of right now, no new student will be brought in, so our lessons would have uneven numbers during pair-up trials or projects. We're going to be choosing class president today, so keep in mind who you want to vote for. Now for roll call. Katsuki snorted loudly from his side of the classroom and Uraraka sent Izuku a puzzled expression. While Aizawa was calling out their names, Uraraka pitched a note onto Izuku's desk. Did you make mine to drop out of school? Ew. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the note, glancing at Uraraka who faced the front as she called out her presence. No, I merely sent him on the path of atonement for his sins. Izuku nearly chucked the note at the back of Ida's head with his coordination, his chair toppling. Aizawa dragged out a sigh and continued on, pretending he wasn't seeing two of his students passing notes back and forth. All right, everyone is here. Now, we will be deciding a class president and vice president. Aizawa spoke and mentally snorted as almost everyone's hands shot up. Let me do it, Kirishima called out eagerly. No, me, Mina exclaimed, waving her hand wildly. Aoyama just shot his hand straight into the air with enough vigor to create an after-image. I believe we should do a voting system. Having Aizawa-sensei choose one of us could be seen as favoritism. Ada called out, Izuku sinking into his seat as the class erupted into noise. Is that all right with you, sensei, if we hold a vote? Aizawa slunk into his sleeping bag, worming his way against the far corner of the room. Whatever, as long as two people are decided. Aizawa slumped over, dead to the world. Kirishima stared intently at his chest, making sure he could see the up and down pattern of him breathing before he paid attention again to... Okay, Ida started as he scribbled everyone's names on the board. Let's all write down who they think would be the best option for class president, and pass them up to the front. He stepped up to the concrete walls, peering up at the towering barrier between him and the school grounds. Something in the air smelt foul, like overly sweet vanilla extract mixed with caramel and oranges. It tainted the air, clinging to the bricks, to people's clothes, to his own self. What is that awful smell? He mumbled to himself, easily navigating through the crowd. They gave him a wide berth, feeling the cold, menacing air swirling around him. It was natural instincts to keep a distance from him, fear overriding their stupidity for a news scoop. It's so sweet. Disgusting. He pressed his hand to the wall, smiling widely as the concrete began to disintegrate into nothing but dust and debris. He dropped his hand, humming to himself as he slipped back through the crowd. His skin burned. He blamed it on the sickeningly sweet aroma. I don't want to play Onigako, Izuku complained loudly, the other children halting in their rush to hide. Why not, Deku? Katsuki huffed out, crossing his tiny arms. It's just a game. Izuku shook his head, frowning. Cause, the real Oni are gonna take that at an invitation. Izuku explained loudly, feeling the air shift around them. His little tufts fluttered frantically, trying to get his point across. Let's play something else. Stupid Deku. One of the other children laughed out. Oni aren't real. Katsuki wavered, looking between the two. Izuku clamped down on his wrist, squeezing tightly. Please Kaken, let's play something else. Izuku begged, tears streaming down his cheeks. If Oni come out, then the Tengu are gonna come out too. Katsuki huffed, letting himself be tugged away by Izuku. Your loss, Bakugo, another child called out. The three children they'd been playing with ended up missing. Katsuki turned to Izuku, who was settled beside him on the couch as the news report played. As he sniffled, Katsuki just stared, mind utterly blank as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. I told them, Kaken. I told them we shouldn't play that game. The world spun for a split second, the desks and students blurring as nausea crawled up his throat. Izuku stumbled back, slamming into his desk as his wings practically vibrated against him, lifting up and cloaking him. The air was rotten. It was only for a split second, a brief sniff of spoiled garbage, but it was enough to completely shut Izuku down. He doubled over, eyes glazed as he clamped his hands over his mouth. It had the faint reek of burning wood, bitter and lingering in his nose. His eyes watered. Where? Izuku curled tight into a ball, closed his eyes, and searched. The sound in the classroom drowned out, everything muffling to the back of his mind as he looked. Nothing, not even a lingering trail. Nothing at all but that minuscule tease of a stench. Midoriya. Izuku's eyes fluttered open, seeing Aizawa knelt in front of him, Uraraka and Ida right at his back, peering down at him with concern. Todoroki's hand was on his shoulder, firm and steadying as Izuku exhaled. Are you okay, Deku-kun? Uraraka spoke carefully and Izuku slowly uncurled, eyes bouncing everywhere. Can you stand? I am fine. I just got dizzy for a moment. Izuku stammered out, wings still shielding him as he stood. Multiple pairs of eyes were on him. Katsuki's narrowed in silent suspicion. Sorry for disrupting the class. It's fine, Aizawa spoke slowly, eyeing the teen up and down for a moment before moving back to the podium. So, we're all in agreement that Ida is the best choice for class president. The students reluctantly moved back to their desks, Todoroki and Uraraka guiding Izuku to his seat with pinched eyebrows. Yes, they called out and Aizawa nodded. Okay, now that that's settled. Izuku droned out Aizawa, eyes glazing over. He couldn't get that smell out of his system. His stomach flipped. He'd never smelt such a potent sin before. It was worse than anything he could have ever imagined. A shiver ran down his spine at the idea of encountering whoever, or whatever, had caused such a miasma. It had been brief but had affected him so strongly. He dreaded meeting them full on. Izuku didn't notice Katsuki's glance over his shoulder at him, eyes hooded with something unreadable. Now, some good news. Aizawa scratched at his cheek, looking towards the door. As you know, due to Minta's transfer, there was one empty desk in our class. Many eyes found Minta's old desk and they turned back to Aizawa. We've reviewed the scores from the entrance exam and looked at the possible candidates and have found a suitable replacement for Minta. The door slid open and the students perked up as their newest classmate slunk in, posture slumped. Class, please welcome Shinsu Hitoshi to Class 1A. He's been transferred from the General Department Class 1 degrees Celsius. Shinsu stood next to Aizawa, hands in his pockets. His eyes landed on Izuku, who was beaming at him. Can I not sit with him? Shinsu asked, pointing to Izuku. The class broke into giggles or snickers and Katsuki's eyebrow raised as Izuku's wings made musical hums. Whatever, sit down. Aizawa shrugged and Shinsu went to the empty desk, plopping down. Okay, now that that's over. He'd grown to despise quirks, or more like those whose lives were made so much easier by accessible quirks. He disliked the notion that only a certain type of quirk was fit for heroism. He disliked the idea that he couldn't make a decent hero. Despite being in the general department, he wanted to prove himself. His chance came in the form of Eraserhead, slumped over and looking about as exhausted as Shinsu felt. Congrats, Eraserhead said after lunch. You're in the heroics department now. Shinsu froze, his brain shutting down. His thoughts were replaced by a loading bar and he stared blankly at Aizawa. The teacher rolled his eyes. Yeah, does not compute. Go get your supplies and come to the classroom. Your records have already been changed and everything. What? Shinsu continued to stare at Aizawa. What? Aizawa sighed. You're transferring classes. Go get your stuff and go to Class 1A. Okay, Aizawa asked slowly and Shinsu nodded dumbly. Head feeling fuzzy. Aizawa eyed him before huffing. Come on, let's go. Aizawa spoke as he tugged on Shinsu's arm and led him down the hall. Am I dreaming? Shinsu paused. Wait, that'd mean I'd be able to sleep. Never mind. Aizawa snorted and shook his head, rubbing at his own eyes. I feel like you're going to get along great with the kids, Aizawa mumbled. Shinsu-kun, Uraraka called as the class packed up for home. Would you like to walk home with us? Shinsu looked up from his bag, exhausted eyes moving from her to Izuku. Sure. Shinsu sighed and Uraraka clapped her hands. Can we get ice cream on the way home? Mina questioned, bag slung over her shoulder. Or stop at the arcade? No. Ada spoke with an aggressive hand chop. It is against the rules for students to stop anywhere after school. It is in our best interest and safety to go straight home. Right, Midoriya-kun? Ada turned to Izuku, who nodded in agreement before pausing guilty. He spoke as Katsuki stuffed his books into his bag angrily. I actually need to stop somewhere before I go home, so I can't walk with you all. Why not, Midoriya? Kirishima asked as he and Kaminari walked over to them. Shinsu's eyebrows raised as he saw feathers hanging around their necks. He jumped when Aoyama slid onto his desk, tilting back dramatically. Everyone in this classroom can see his wings, Aoyama explained for Shinsu, stretching his legs out to bridge Uraraka between Katsuki's desk and Shinsu's. Shinsu blinked sleepily. Everyone, he echoed and Katsuki snarled, still taking his sweet time to gather his things. Everyone, Aoyama confirmed. Midoriya-kun, where are you going? Ada looked curious as well, making chopping motions as he waited for Izuku's answer. I have to stop by the church, Izuku explained meekly, hugging his bag straps. Uraraka blinked and Todoroki, waiting patiently by Izuku's desk, raised an eyebrow. The church? Jiru questioned, waiting for Momo to finish packing up. Katsuki slammed his foot into his desk, nearly hitting Uraraka. The goody two-shoes goes to pray every week, Katsuki snapped out, hauling his bag over his shoulder. Fucking nerd. Katsuki stomped out of the classroom. Kaminari and Kirishima exchanged looks before chasing after Katsuki, leaving the classroom silent. Is it an angel thing? Suyu asked, closing her book bag up. Izuku nodded and Shinsu released a breath. That's so weird. So everyone here has a feather and can see his wings? Shinsu asked and Ada hummed affirmative. Well, I'll see you guys later. Izuku spoke awkwardly and they waved their goodbyes. Izuku beamed and skipped out, his wings tinkering behind him. Shinsu watched, entranced. So what's your quirk? Shiro asked politely. Shinsu gave a slow, tentative smile. Izuku looked away, hands trembling behind his back. The woman was talking happily with his mother, blurting out one dirty sin after the other, and Ko just continued to smile politely, her eyes gleaming in a way that he knew meant she was using her grace. Finally, after what seemed like eternity, the woman bowed and left, humming to herself. Mama, Izuku whispered softly, tugging on his mother's pant leg. Why did she say all that to you? Inko looked at him and crouched down, tucking a curl behind his ear. Because our eyes are kind of like confession boxes. Our grace compels people to spill their souls to us, Inko explained with a hum. That's why you have these on. Inko tapped his glasses, even though they're fake. Izuku whispered and Inko nodded. If you didn't wear these, then people would be blurting out their darkest secrets left and right. It creates less of a hassle in the long run. Inko stood up, holding her hand out. Izuku grasped onto her hand, looking down at his feet. Is that why Kaken called me a freak? Izuku asked softly and Inko stopped. Did my eyes make him say that? Was it the truth? Inko gave him a sad smile and ruffled his hair, swinging their hands back and forth as she began walking. No, sweetie. Katsuki-kun's just confused and scared. He's a child, Inko explained. I am too, Izuku didn't say and kept silent the rest of the walk to the park. Thank you again for inviting me over for dinner, Toshinori spoke out as he stepped into the apartment. Izuku bounced on his heels, humming happily. His wings flapped cheerfully behind him and Toshinori just stared, still unable to get used to the sight of them phasing through stuff as if they weren't really there. Of course, my mom loves having you over. Auntie can't swing by a lot of the time and with Dad gone overseas, she craves the company, Izuku responded as he all but skipped into the living room. Mom, Yagi-san is over. Hello, Inko greeted, smiling warmly to the man. Just in time. I just need the table set up. I got it, Izuku volunteered, slipping past his mother. You can sit at the table. Toshinori wavered awkwardly before sliding into an empty chair, folding his hands on top of the surface. Izuku danced around the table, placing plates and glasses down. Midoriya-san, I can help. Nonsense. You are a guest. Just relax, dear. Inko smiled as she placed a steaming pot of sukiyaki down in the center of the table. Izuku placed a small bowl of rice at Toshinori's elbow and he sat still, feeling extremely out of place. Once the table was set and the two angels were seated, Inko bowed her head. Izuku followed suit and Toshinori blinked slowly, comprehending what they were doing. We humbly receive this food we are about to consume, blessed by our Father. Amen. Toshinori leaned back as the two lifted their heads and Inko giggled at his expression. I hope we aren't making you uncomfortable. Oh, no, Toshinori jolted, shaking his head. He quickly gave his thanks silently and waited for the two to grab their chopsticks. Thank you for having me over. Inko nodded, gathering a plate up for the man. It's no bother. It's nice to have company over and Hisashi would be so happy to meet one of Izuku's soulmates. Inko's gaze softened. You'd probably get along with my husband very well. Ah, Toshinori dragged out as he grabbed at the offered plate, bobbing his head once in thanks. Where is your husband? Overseas, Inko spoke promptly. He partners with the American Quirk Society, along with a good 100 others. Toshinori's eyebrows raised up, impressed. That was basically a high-paying government job. Well, I see. I understand they don't come home a lot. Toshinori questioned as Izuku popped a piece of tofu into his mouth. That's right. So, Inko cleared her throat. How have you been? She eyed Toshinori. You seem healthier. I'm assuming All Might won't be retiring anytime soon. Toshinori spat out his food, hacking and wheezing as Izuku and Inko innocently looked at him as if they couldn't understand what made him spit his food. You told her. Toshinori wheezed, pounding on his chest as he tried to inhale. Izuku doesn't keep things from me, Inko spoke with a smile. So yes, he told me. It's fine, I won't tell a soul. I need you to understand, Toshinori spoke seriously, that you cannot ever tell anyone. If this gets out, dear, Inko spoke, her eyes gleaming with something old, you have my word. I won't tell anyone. I promise. Now, let's clean up that mess and continue dinner. Todoroki squinted at Izuku. Why does your gym uniform have an open back as well? Izuku fidgeted, sandwiched between the teen and Aoyama. His cheeks heated, his freckles more prominent against his skin. The support department is currently repairing my uniform and saw the open back and agreed that, it looks better on me. Something about the aesthetics. So, Izuku ducked his head. They made my gym uniform backless too. Izuku hid his face in his hands. Your hero costume is backless, Shinsu asked. Also dressed in a gym uniform. A normal one thankfully, with no back window or missing sections. Why? Just, why? He was settled behind Katsuki, pressed up against the window. Field trip, field trip, field trip. Mina chanted, kicking her legs back and forth as she sat across from Izuku, Uraraka and Jiru on either side of her. Hey, if your wings phase through stuff, how comes you have to have the open back? Precautions, Izuku explained simply, peeking out between his fingers. Katsuki, squished into a seat next to Kirishima and across from Kaminari, snorted. So, you're an actual angel, correct, Ribbit? Tsuyu spoke out in curiosity. How does that work? I wonder what the trial is going to be. Izuku questioned loudly, ignoring Tsuyu's question. It's a rescue trial, so I can see a few options. Shut up, Katsuki snapped out, slumping into his seat. This is fucking bullshit. You're fucking bullshit, Shinsu grumbled lowly under his breath. Katsuki whirls, palm already igniting. What did you just say, eggplant? Katsuki roared. Stop bothering me, Shinsu ordered, and Katsuki's expression went slack, his body jerky as it turned around. Zero gave a appreciative whistle and Hagakure giggled. Language, Aizawa called from the front of the bus. I am not your babysitter, do not make me act like one. Shinsu, stop using your quirk. Shinsu grumbled and reached over, flicking Katsuki in the ear. Katsuki jerked out of the control and glared murderously at the teen. Aizawa watched them like a hawk. Katsuki huffed and slumped against his seat, Kirishima and Kaminari cooing and jeering at him. We're almost there, so settle down, Aizawa called, checking his phone. No messages from All Might. Who is going to meet them at their location? Typical. Roughly 10 minutes later, the class was filed out of the bus and entered the giant dome, gawking at the enormous size of it. Whoa, Jiru wheezed next to Momo. Landslides, buildings on fire, even a whirlpool. The arena had everything. 13, where's All Might? Aizawa sighed as he walked up to the hero. 13 scratched at his suit, humming. He's stuck helping a hostage situation a few miles from here. He texted me saying he'd be on his way right after. Aizawa stared for a moment before pinching the bridge of his nose. Sighing loudly. Of course he is, he muttered to himself. Okay, that's fine. We can work with just the two of us. 13 nodded in agreement and Aizawa turned to the students. Listen to him when he's talking, Aizawa instructed and leaned against the railing behind him. The students turned their attention to 13 as the hero began his speech, explaining his quirk and what it was used for. One moment Izuku was listening to 13 talk. The next he was on his knees as bile and stomach acid shoved itself past his lips. He clamped his hands over his mouth in a desperate attempt to keep the vomit down, but instead all it did was make him choke and spit up even more. Uraraka gave a high-pitched shriek as Izuku went down, her eyes widening as her heart nearly leapt from her chest. Izuku's skin instantly paled as vomit splattered against the concrete of the ground, his body trembling as his eyes seemed to glaze over. Deku-kun. He didn't respond, and Uraraka sent a helpless look over to Ida and Aoyama, who shuffled closer. Their own complexions were pale, concern twisting their brows up. Shinsu's eyes were wide, bouncing between each student as if expecting one of them to help. Aizawa jerked forward, only to stop when something in the air shifted. Out the corner of his eye, he saw a tiny small swirl of black dust twist elegantly in the air, like a leaf dancing against the breeze. Todoroki knelt down next to the angelic teen, hesitantly touching a hand to his shoulder as the other students just stared, unable to do anything but watch. His wings stretched out into a beautiful, fragile arch, humming desperately like a choir sounding their mourning for a rested friend. Todoroki's eyes swept over his classmates, watching how Katsuki's mouth opened and closed in something akin to knowing horror. He mentally questioned the expression, watching how the blonde shifted forward and tugged Kaminari and Kirishima back behind him. Katsuki acted as if he knew what was happening, or at least had some semblance of awareness to the situation. Either way, he was leaving everyone else blind as he seemed to begin moving the students behind him like he was going to be a shield. It sent a cold rock of anxiety dropping in Todoroki's stomach. What was happening? Izuku couldn't breathe. His senses were drowned in that rotten, disgusting odor of burning wood, months-old milk festering in the blistering sunlight, and spoiled eggs. His eyes watered as he hacked, curling into himself as his vision spotted. He couldn't breathe. The sulfuric bitterness was too much for his delicate senses, devouring him like a famished animal. The sounds around him muted until all he heard was an inhumane screeching, higher in pitch than anything normal humans could possibly hear. His surroundings trembled, vibrating as the air thickened into an impossible density. It was haunting, like nails scraping against a chalkboard and overlapped with a banshee's reversed shrieks. It echoed, slamming into his temples and deafening until it rang in his ears like a catchy tune with no way of losing it. His wings burned, as if held close to a roaring fire and kept there to slowly boil from the inside out. It hurt. It was agony. The air was tainted, simmering with a visible cloud of black smoke and, wait, black smoke. Everyone cluster together and don't move. Aizawa was roaring, Uraraka and Todoroki on either side of Izuku as they tried to get him to his feet. 13. Protect the students. Izuku lifted his head, vomit-stained hands falling limply to his side as his eyes widened. Todoroki and Uraraka shrunk back with sharp hisses, shaking their hands out as Izuku's wings swooped against their hold. Thunderous gongs echoed throughout the arena, like giant church bells tolling, sending vibrations shaking the arena. Izuku stared, almost in a trance, tears scorching track marks down his pale cheeks. He was barely breathing, chest still as he took in the figure stumbling out of the war portal away from them. If Izuku's wings were described as glass panes of a church window, the mysterious figure's wings could only be compared to worn leather, stretched to its last thread and burned over and over against until it was barely held together. The tips were dyed in dark red, like blood pooling and aging over time. Splotches of blues, purples, reds, and dark grays overlapped over the length of his tattered, old wings. Sharp points finished each wing at the top and the bottom of each wing, which hung limply at his side as he heaved. His curved horns poked out from his mangy locks, his right horn broken at the tip. They looked like bruises, colored in dark purples and navies that blended into blemishes. His horns were chipped and cracked, looking like brittle stone ready to crumble under the faintest touch. He looked more skeleton than human, thin limbs jutting out from his clothes. They hung off his frame, giving clear view of his collarbone and rib cage as he doubled open, vomit catching against the hand covering his face. He was pale, skin almost translucent and clashing horribly against his tangled, wild blue hair. His frame was wiry, lanky to the point of awkward. Izuku's pupils narrowed into sharp points, the gold overtaking the green as his wings rose in challenge. Tears continued to bead down his cheeks, his heart weeping for the being before him. Demon, Izuku choked out, spine straightening as something in him clicked into place. Like welcoming an old friend home, his chest blossomed in a comforting, familiar heat that pumped through his veins and calmed the thrashing in his head. Despite it, his heart still squeezed in agony, mourning the pain and suffering he sensed coming off the demon in waves. The air around the demon was thicker than black, smelt of everything foul in the world, and screamed hunger. He was starved. He smelt and felt like he hadn't devoured a sinner's soul in decades. That was bad. That was absolutely terrifying, because when a demon was starved, they started eating innocent souls instead of those who were corrupted. But at the same time, it was pitiful. This poor creature, broken and starved to a state that no demon should be in. Not even those who served directly to the one true evil would ever be in such a state of weakness and vulnerability. It made Izuku's soul wail for his damaged, damned kin. Danger was drawing close, and Izuku did not have the time to lose himself to emotions. With that thought, his heart froze. "Do you all have your feathers?" Izuku spoke out, words clipped and tone flat. Something about him was different, the air around him thin and tangible as his shoulders squared out. His posture straightened out, tightened, and the vomit on his hands disappeared in the blink of an eye. "Deku-kun," Uraraka whispered out, a bead of sweat trickling down her face. Izuku turned his head towards her and she stiffened, the air leaving her lungs as those otherworldly eyes burned into her. This was not Midoriya Izuku standing before her. This was someone, something else. "Do you?" Izuku spoke more slowly, words more pronounced, and the students backed up from him, something in their chests tightening as his dead eyes bore into them. "Have your feathers." Scattered murmurs of acknowledgement answered him and he nodded. His wings fanned out, casting shadows against the clustered students and pro-heroes. Midoriya Aizawa's voice died in his throat as Izuku stared him down. "He has delivered us from the power of darkness and translated us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our sins." Nina gave a soft gasp as their bodies were blanketed in transparent veils of shimmering gold dust, their feathers glowing brightly like a candle at full burn. Jiru stumbled back into Momo, who was being flanked by Shoji and Satu. Ajiru's tail was wrapped loosely around Hagakure and Tsuyu, keeping them shielded. Kaminari shifted closer to Kuji while Siro looked between Takoyami and Ida nervously. Shinsu shifted his footing, scratching at his arm, and saw Katsuki wince as a thin trail of smoke coiled up from his collarbone. 13's legs trembled, unable to move. He couldn't, focused on those burning gold eyes. "You are protected from that foul creature." Izuku tilted his head back, eyes half-lidded. "However, normal villains can still harm you." A portal warped in behind the students and they felt invisible hands lurching them forward. "Run!" 13 cried out as the black wisp-like villain, Kurogiri, stepped out of the portal. "Don't just stand there, run!" No one moved. "Run!" Shinsu all but roared, but it was too late. Katsuki and Kirishima lunged forward, attacking Kurogiri. Izuku's eyes narrowed as Kurogiri summoned black mist, surrounding the students. Kirishima grabbed Katsuki's arm, holding onto him tight as they were swallowed by the mist. Izuku grabbed on tightly to Uraraka and Todoroki, face blank. "Do not let go of me," he demanded, and watched the class slowly get eaten by the black veil. Heat pumped in his veins as they disappeared, one by one. He felt them scatter across the arena, their feathers pulsating wildly in response to his cold fury. "Deku-kun," Uraraka stammered out, grabbing Todoroki's right hand, huddling in close to make a weirdly shaped triangle with their bodies. What's going on?" "Amongst the villains is a demon," Izuku whispered as the mist covered them. "Demons are bad, Uraraka-san. Very, very bad." Izuku pressed his two soulmates closer to him, tucking Uraraka's face against his chest while he squeezed Todoroki to his side. "I'm sorry," Todoroki spoke, shoving himself away from Izuku and Uraraka. "I can handle myself, though. I don't need to be protected." Todoroki met Izuku's wide-eyed gaze and nodded seriously. "I'm not weak." They were gone. Water filled their lungs and Uraraka's mouth opened involuntarily, detaching herself from Izuku as she forced her eyes open against the air bubbles. She recoiled, seeing a villain rushing at them. Tsuyu slammed into the villain, knocking it away from them. Her tongue slithered around Uraraka's waist, tugging her, and Uraraka latched onto Izuku's limp hand. The water moved as Tsuyu shot through the water, breaching the surface. Using her tongue, she tossed Uraraka and Izuku out of the water and onto the ship's deck. Asui-chan. Uraraka cheered, brushing her dripping wet hair out of her face. Tsuyu crawled up the side of the boat, pushing her own wet hair out of her face. Thank you. Call me Tsuyu-chan. Tsuyu responded and climbed over the railing, plopping down. She looked at the two. What's the plan? Izuku stood up, pushing his wet bangs out of his face. His wings shook out, sprinkling the two girls in water droplets. His glasses were gone, lost in the depths of the pool. I gather up my soulmates again. Izuku responded coldly, eyes dangerous as he studied the two. And I protect you all. Uraraka shivered, hugging herself as she scooted closer to Tsuyu. She touched Uraraka's arm, offering silent comfort as their boat became surrounded. Deku-kun is scary, Uraraka whispered to Tsuyu as those wings lifted up. Tsuyu tilted her head to the side, expression openly curious. Aren't angels soldiers of God? Tsuyu questioned as those bells chimed again. Why is this surprising? Uraraka stared at Tsuyu, mouth opening and closing. My mom's of Catholic faith. I know a bit about angels. Tsuyu turned her gaze away. Oh, Uraraka whispered out, gut clenching. Do we have a plan, Deku-kun? We fight, Izuku spoke solemnly. You will be safe with me. Don't worry. A heavy bell chime resonated throughout the arena. Bring it. Katsuki roared as Kirishima knocked another villain out. Fucking weaklings. Is this the best you got? Stop instigating them. Kirishima shrieked out, swinging at another villain. You're gonna piss them off. What's your deal, bro? He ducked a fist, slamming a hardened knee into the gut of a rhinoceros-looking villain, and he went down hard. Diku. Katsuki whirled, getting in Kirishima's face with a snarl. You don't know what's going on, so shut the fuck up. Katsuki shoved back from Kirishima and he narrowed his eyes. What? How his personality did a complete 180 the moment the villains showed up. I'm not stupid, dude. We're working together, so act like you actually can deal with other people for just 5 minutes. Kirishima panted, his voice having raised by the end of his words. Katsuki gawked at him, alarmed someone had raised their voice at him. Fine, but only because we're stuck together. Katsuki growled out and slammed a fist into a villain's chest, setting off an explosion. So am I the only one feeling my soreness disappear the longer this feather glows? Kaminari asked as Momo and Jiru brandished their weapons. Nope, Jiru spoke, the sharp machete in her hold glinting. I feel it too. Her feather, attached to her belt, pulsed. Momo glanced at Kaminari as the villains grew closer, meeting his eyes. Can you put out a strong discharge? Momo asked and Kaminari's eye sparked. He nodded and Momo lunged at Jiru, cloaking them in a sheet created from her body. The moment the sheet completely covered them, Kaminari shot out a giant wave of electricity, shocking the villains. They crumpled and Kaminari stumbled, dazed. Are you okay? Jiru asked, eyebrows raising as Kaminari nodded dumbly, still looking like his head was somewhere else. Great, let's move and try and get to the rest of the class. Midoriya-kun wasn't settling. Momo spoke as she rolled up the sheet. I guess he really is an angel. She touched her feather, hanging around her neck, and her expression softened. Kaminari cheered. Jiru burst out laughing, unable to help herself as Momo sighed loudly. The entire area was caked in ice, inches thick and impossible to break. The villains were encased in cages of ice, their eyes blankly staring at him as they struggled against their bonds. Todoroki exhaled, watching his cloud of breath drift away in the wind. Despite the freezing temperatures, his chest was warm, pulsating in sync to Izuku's heartbeat. The feather hummed gently, soothing his nerves. Is this seriously all you have? Todoroki asked darkly, shadows deepening his glare. You adults are pathetic. Another villain, not caught in the ice, lunged. You fucking little. A sheet of ice encased the villain up to his neck and he squeaked out. You have two options, Todoroki spoke blandly. Either freeze to death or tell me what the plan was. Todoroki tilted his head to the side, studying the captured villains. Are you crying? And no, one of the villains sniffled, tears gathering along his eyes. Why, you're supposed to be a hero, right? I want to be a hero, Todoroki confirmed. So, if possible, I'd like to avoid any cruel situations. Todoroki raised his right hand to the villain's face, letting ice particles brush the villain's face. So what will you choose? The villain whimpered, tears shamelessly streaming down his cheeks. I don't want to die. Todoroki lowered his hand, dead eyes boring into the man. So speak, Todoroki instructed, and the villain sniffled again. Unless, the ice intensified and the villain gave a strangled cry in the back of their throat. No, I'll speak. The villain cried out. Another villain, laying on their frozen side, wheezed out as their teeth clattered, their own tears freezing from the low temperature around them. We heard rumors of All Might weakening. As the months passed, the villain stuttered out, snot dripping along his lip. We were going to ambush him here, but he wasn't so. You were going to attempt to kill All Might? Todoroki asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you guys stupid as well as incompetent? Now that's just mean, another villain mumbled, about 3 frozen bodies away from Todoroki. He rolled his eyes, dropping his hand. Now what to do with them? If he melted them, their bodies would be too weak to move and he could tie them up. But then that offered them the chance to escape. Bud was a hero in training. Killing these villains wouldn't look very professional or acceptable if recorded. He pursed his lips, mulling over his options. The feather, hidden under his clothing, heated up just the tiniest bit. It covered the entire arena, thicker and more potent than before. He gagged again, hunching over to heave more bile past his lips. It was wretched, smelling of tangerines and overly sweet vanilla extract and flowers. Absolutely disgusting. It burned his flesh, searing into him like acid or chemicals against his pores. His wings throbbed, withering against his back as his head hammered a headache fierce enough to leave black spots floating along his vision. His horns ached and that never-ending hunger ate at his stomach, demanding nourishment food couldn't seem to satisfy. He hung back, trying to gather himself back up despite the poison in the air. Where was it coming from? What was the source? He wanted to claw his own throat out, wanting to find some release to the torture. His eyes watered, tears trickling down his cheeks as he watched Eraserhead fight through the villains. Something pricked at his spine and he looked up and over, towards the direction of the flood area. The nauseating stench seemed to be focusing in that area, and if he wasn't so busy, he'd have made his way over. But for now, his main focus was on Eraserhead. And then a flash of purple entered, flanking Eraserhead's side, and he raised an eyebrow. They don't know our quirks. Achako spoke as she shifted her footing. Izuku nodded, his expression smoothing out the tiniest bit. No, why else would they warp a Tsui-san here? Izuku explained, ignoring Tsuyu's request of, call me Tsuyu. I'd be terrible in the fire area, Tsuyu agreed. They must not have realized my quirk thrives in water. Izuku nodded, pressing a hand to his lips as he began muttering to himself. I have a plan. Tsuyu-san, Uraraka-san, are you two ready to fight? Uraraka nodded in determination, Tsuyu giving a positive croak. I'm going to break 2 of my fingers for this, Izuku explained, but I won't feel the pain and they'll heal before we make it back to surface. Just follow my lead, all right. Uraraka and Tsuyu gave terse bobs of their heads and Izuku gave a gentle smile. Oh Lord, I reach out to you for your guidance, Izuku spoke as he took a running start, throwing himself off the railing of the boat. Please show me which way to turn. Midair, his wings spread out, catching on the air. Calm my anxious thoughts, come speak into my mind. Using his thumb and middle finger, Izuku pumped one for all into the digits and set off a forceful flick of power at the water where the villains were clustered. Strengthen me as I falter and feel weary. May I feel strength rising up within my heart. Izuku felt Tsuyu's tongue wrap around his waist as the villains slammed into each other, sinking under, unconscious. Amen. Uraraka patted Izuku, held against Tsuyu's side as she held them up in the air with her quirk. Her eyes narrowed as her skin gained a sickly gray color, her arms trembling. They floated leisurely over to the shore, touching ground. Uraraka bent over, heaving loudly. Izuku patted her shoulder, drawing soothing circles along her back as she coughed and spat out the bile in her mouth. Good job, Tsuyu spoke, eyeing Izuku's fingers as they mended themselves. You don't feel that? Izuku blinked, looking up from Uraraka. He shook his head, holding his hand up. No, Kaken and Kirishima-kun are that way. Izuku spoke as he pointed over to the ruins, and Kaminari-kun, Jiru-san, and Yaoyorozu-san are that way. Izuku pointed to the mountains. Jiru-san and them are heading this way, so I suggest you go meet up with them. We aren't leaving you. Uraraka blurted out, looking pale. Deku-kun, no. We have to save Aizawa-sensei. Uraraka looked over Izuku's shoulder. Then he felt it, as if a knife was plunged through his chest. Izuku wheezed and whirled, eyes blazing. Hey, what are you guys called again? Shinsu called out as he ducked under a tossed knife. The League of Dickwads. Shinsu, Aizawa barked out, settling beside the teen. What are you? That warp guy warped me close to here, Shinsu spoke with a shrug, ducking in time for Aizawa to punch a cat-eared villain away from them. Keep by me. Hey, you guys are really pathetic villains. My grandma can make a toddler cry easier than you guys. Are you seriously villains? The fuck you say, brat? Idiot number 1. Ah, the little kitty thinks he can do anything. Idiot number 2. Let's kill him in front of his teacher. Idiot number 3. More voices rung out and Shinsu smirked. That made 20. So stupid. Villains, Shinsu DRLY ordered. Stay still for my teacher. Aizawa wasted no time in taking the frozen villains out, rendering them unconscious. Thanks, Aizawa gruffed and Shinsu tipped his head in acknowledgement. He startled when Aizawa grabbed him by the shoulder, pushing him close to his chest as he swung a fist out, slamming it into a villain's face. The villain fell and Shinsu looked behind him. Thanks, sensei, Shinsu mumbled, dancing out of the way as Aizawa twisted in the air in a flurry of fierce anger and powerful blows. Aizawa's eyes skimmed their surrounding, bypassing the crowding villains. His eyes settled on a discarded metal bow staff and his gaze fleeted to Shinsu. How good is your arm strength? Aizawa asked as he used his scarf to snatch the staff up. Shinsu catched the offered staff and stared with wide eyes. I have never used one of these, Shinsu explained, but swung it like a bat anyways, slamming the end into a villain's head. But I used to play baseball, if that counts. For now, Aizawa gruffed, throwing out a few caltrops towards villains charging him. He eyed Shinsu out the corner of his eye, watching the teen swing the staff around with clumsy inexperience but good control. He'd have to offer him lessons if, when they made it out alive, he had potential, looking at his stance. Definitely teaching him once they're finished with all of this. Duck, Shinsu warned, and Aizawa felt the tip of the staff brush against his hair as Shinsu swung, knocking a villain's arm back. Aizawa did a roundhouse kick, sending the villain flying. Shinsu's eyes widened. Sensei. Aizawa kicked Shinsu away just as the stranger with the hands descended upon them, hand gripping onto Aizawa's elbow tightly. Aizawa slammed his fist into the guy's face, hearing a satisfying crack, and wrenched his disintegrated elbow out of the man's hold. Sensei, Shinsu wheezed out, holding his stomach. Aizawa stumbled back, standing in front of him protectively. You know, the villain hummed, instead of paying attention to me, you should pay attention to that. Shinsu flew off the side like a rubber band being slingshot away, slamming into the wall of the arena. He crumpled forward, blood trailing steadily from his face as he bodily sagged. He didn't move. Aizawa whirled, just in time to see an enormous hand slam down into him. His world went black for a second, only to come back full force to white-hot pain lacing up and down his arm. Whatever this giant creature was, it had snapped his disintegrated arm in its hold, the limb looking more zigzag than any arm should. Aizawa blinked, seeing puddles of red under him. Another hand was pressing down into his opposite arm, crushing his shoulder. He felt like a flimsy tree branch, breaking into pieces without any effort. His right side was beginning to feel numb, a fog settling over his mind. A hand gripped his head, rearing it back before slamming him into the ground. He could feel the bones of his face caving in, his skin sinking as it suddenly had room to move. His cheek felt hollow, like an empty air pocket had formed wrong. Where was Shinsu? Was he all right? What about the other children? Were they okay? His head was slammed down again and all thoughts scattered, leaving nothing but jumbled words or letters. White overtook his vision and a ringing sounded shrill in his ear, like an alarm. More red splattered against the cracked crater, a perfect imprint of his body formed. Against his chest, his feather blazed. Foul creature, aren't angels supposed to be strong? Izuku mentally giggled at the man's innocent question. Warriors or whatever it says in the Bible? Toshinori asked. Can't you just use your angelic powers or whatever to lift the heavy stuff? He gave a startled bark of laughter, dropping the broken CD in his hand. I wish, Izuku giggled out. Sadly, were watered-down seraphim compared to the amazing ones mentioned in texts of him. It was no lie, but not necessarily a truth either. Compared to the whole angels, they were watered down. I don't have otherworldly strength, which was not a lie but not a truth either considering the conditions, and my grace cannot work as you believe. Because outside of his soulmates, Izuku was basically a normal human. Outside of his soulmates, the only angelic thing about him were his grace-filled eyes. Because outside of his soulmates, Izuku never felt the need to draw upon the ancient blood in his veins. While his wings and eyes were angelic, it was not all he could be or all he was. He just never thought it was necessary to sink into himself, to drown under memories of lives not his own but was. Because his soulmates were his everything, gifted to him by his father, and nothing would take them away. Toshinori jolted, scrambling to claw his feather out of his pocket. It was molten hot, feeling like a red coal against his palm. It pulsed erratically, humming insistently. He frowned down at the feather, just in time for a blue to shot by him. Toshinori blinked and saw Ida speeding the way he'd came. Transforming into All Might, he called out to the teen. Ida skidded to a halt, nearly pitching forward from the momentum. All Might, Ida cried out, whirling. He was paling, trembling, gasping for air. The villains and it's bad. Ida crumpled, gasping for air as All Might stared down at him. He was not smiling. The USJ? All Might asked Stiffy and Ida nodded, looking up at him. All Might planted a hair on his helmet, giving an awkward pat. Go inform the principal and the rest of the teachers. All Might hesitated. Are you all right? I'm okay, Ida responded, sniffling as tears streamed down his cheeks. He gripped a shaking hand to his feather, not knowing All Might could see it. Midoriya-kun. Ida inhaled. Something wasn't right about him. All Might nodded once and turned Ida back to the direction of the school. Go. All Might took off, leaving Ida to watch his back as he sped towards the USJ. The entire arena stilled. An indescribable pressure slammed down onto them, petrifying them where they stood. The air was heavy, forcing them immobile from the sheer density of the invisible force. It did not feel malicious, nor did it feel suffocating. Rather, it felt majestic. Villains and students alike could only stand there, hearts gripped in fear and uncertainty to the overall sense of cluelessness they all felt. Their feathers felt like miniature infernos, searing into their flesh painfully. But just as quickly as the pain came, it left, leaving them woozy and blinking stars from their eyes. Their bodies felt warm, leeching away their exhaustion, their fear, their anxiety, leaving nothing but endless comfort and confidence. They were left trembling in anticipation. Anticipation for what? None of them knew. The creature froze, hand dropping Aizawa's head. Aizawa dropped like a rock in water, his chest barely moving in small bursts of up and down movements. The creature looked up just as Kirigiri warped over to the demon, calling out his name. Shigaraki Tamura, Kirigiri called out. 13 has been defeated, but a child got away. Kirigiri waited for something. Anything. But when silence met his statement, he peered curiously at the man. Shigaraki's eyes were wide and lost behind the hand hiding his face, pupils dilated in something as he stared, trance-like, in front of them. Kirigiri followed his gaze and had to do a double take. A child was walking towards them, steps purposeful and powerful. His eyes were burning, molten gold against thin, almost non-existent slitted pupils. What Kirigiri could not see, Shigaraki could, and he wheezed, his wings trembling against his back. Shigaraki's eyes took in those 4 other wings flicker into existence like a glitch on a TV screen, their form static and their color monotone. With each blink of the eye they were gone, brief little glimpses. The smell was overwhelming and Shigaraki watched the lines of the child's face crease up in disgust, clearly smelling something foul as well. His hair looked feathery, as if his green curls had slowly bled into little strands of feathers. Gold dust caked his skin and mixed with his eyes, raining down from the fragmented, glass-like formation slowly materializing above his head. The lazily rotating formation looked like it was made out of tiny, spinning 8-pointed stars, making an orbit over his head in the shape of a ring. It almost reminded those who were observing and could see of an angel's halo, only twisted and looking more like an art's craft gone wrong than something that symbolized anything holy. Izuku stopped short, eyes sliding over to Aizawa. His eyes moved back to Shigaraki and his gaze hardened. "You've hurt my soulmates," Izuku bluntly stated. Shigaraki's eyes shuddered in their sockets. "You." The demonic man spat the word out as if it was dirt, mouth twisted into a snarl. "Hear the reason for the stench." He backed away from Izuku, hidden eyes narrowed. "It's coming from you, whatever you are." "You." Izuku tilted his head to the side, eyes squinting in confusion. "You don't recognize me." "What I am?" He was beyond damaged, it seemed. "Naomu, attack." Shigaraki called out and the creature leapt away from Aizawa, lunging at Izuku. Izuku's eyes locked on with the Naomu's and the creature screeched to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust. "Naomu, perish." Izuku reeled his arm back and slammed a punch directly into the creature's stomach. His arm split open like a knife had tried carving ribbons into his flesh, bones shattering and blood instantly streaming at his feet. The ground shook from the punch, the Naomu shuddering. It hunched over and swung a fist, slamming it against Izuku's side. Izuku grunted, barely budging as he gripped tightly onto the hand digging into his side. His side curved in unnaturally. He pressed his palm to the Naomu's chest, grace pushing through him to send the creature reeling backwards. Grace tore through his body, healing him instantly. A lick of black bled into his eyes. Izuku took the opening to lunge at Aizawa, crouching down low as he checked on the man. His pulse was weak, his breathing making a wet, rattling noise with each feeble push of his chest. His arms were mangled, his face a clump of warm blood and shredded flesh. Izuku knew that if the man didn't have his feather on him, he'd be dead. His wings shook in rage, the air sweltering as he glared at Shigaraki. He could feel his grace swirling through the man's body, trying to mend what it could with the strain of already working on Izuku's body. He gathered Aizawa into his arms, being gentle despite hauling an adult nearly a full head taller than him. Awkwardly shifting, he forced one for all into his legs, hearing his bones snap and crack as he jumped away from Shigaraki and the Naomu. Izuku crumpled to the ground next to Tsuyu and Ochako, blinking in bewilderment. Glancing at his legs, he saw them twisted, white bones stabbing through the blue of his gym pants. Oh, his grace worked furiously, straightening his legs out in seconds until all was left were holes or blood stains. "Watch him," Izuku ordered from the 2 girls, who nodded in grim determination. Izuku gave a stern bob of his head and turned his gaze back to Shigaraki. Tsuyu and Uraraka were careful in laying Aizawa out on his back, both of them trying to keep the tears from their eyes as they ignored their teacher's faint wheezing. Aizawa's body faintly glowed a warming white. "Dear God," Izuku whispered softly to himself, the air at his feet swirling, dust and tiny pebbles lifting off the ground. "I ask for the strength to defeat this evil. I accept the drawbacks that this feeble soul suffers. Grant me power. Amen." Shigaraki blinked and the student was gone, a cloud of dust in his wake. The Naomu gave a high-pitched shriek as it slammed into the ground, the child's feet embedded into its head. His wings were raised, glowing and humming loud enough to shatter glass. His eyes were pure gold, no black in sight, and entirely focused on Shigaraki. He floated up from the Namu's head, his wings holding him in the air. Afloat and glowing from the structure above his hair, he looked like a true angel. Another blink and the child was right in his personal space, mere inches from his chest. Shigaraki threw a hand out, touching one of those wings just as the child's fist buried into his cheekbone, knocking off the hand covering his face. The pain was indescribable, like thousands of heated iron rods pushing into his body simultaneously while nails were being hammered through his spine. Shigaraki stumbled backwards, clawing at his face as if to rid himself of the white-hot suffering. Izuku drifted back, feet grazing the ground as his wings spasmed. Tears streamed down his face, his left wing twitching as his grace tore through the disintegrated area, trying to soothe the wound. It was useless. The limb charred black as gray spots littered his feathers. Touched by evil, tainted until purified, Izuku shoved the feeling of his nerve endings on fire out of his mind, letting that single-minded, deep-embedded instinct take over. His bottom lip split open, trailing red, as he bit through the skin to muffle his screams. Angels felt no pain. Angels felt no pain. Angels felt no pain. What are you? Shigaraki snarled low as he scrambled for his detached hand, planting it back on his face. Izuku caught glowing red eyes before the face was hidden again. I'm your kin, Izuku answered softly, and the one who will bring salvation to your wretched existence. Shigaraki growled low in his throat, taking a step forward. A loud boom shook the arena, everyone looking to the entrance. All Might stood there, frown on his face and muscles tense under his button-up. All Might, the students cried out, Mina openly sobbing as she knelt by 13's ruined body. All Might patted her head gently, his palm engulfing her before he stepped back from her. In a flash he was beside Izuku. The remaining conscious villains slumped down to the ground, out cold. You hurt my students, All Might gritted out, eyes moving to Izuku's limp wing. You hurt my friend. His eyes flashed to Aizawa. Tsuyu and Uraraka were floating him over to Mina and the rest. Uraraka looking fierce despite her sickly pallor. All Might, Shigaraki called in greeting, expression crazed behind his hand. So nice of you to finally join us. Kurogiri twisted, lost to what had transpired beforehand, but now certain their plan would come to fruition. Hopefully. That child with the gold eyes unsettled him more than all for one. Sorry it took so long. All Might spoke softly to Izuku. Are you okay? Is your wing okay? Izuku's expression calmed, less hardened celestial being and more uncertain, anxious teenager. Izuku nodded, wings drawing up tight against his back. His halo shattered like an icicle hitting the unforgiving concrete, raining pieces down around him until it was gone from existence. All Might didn't have time to ask before he was moving in front of Izuku, shielding a punch from the Namu. All Might's arms tensed from the force of the punch, silently startled by how strong the creature was. If he hadn't been healed, All Might didn't want to think about that. He drew an arm back and slammed it into the Namu's stomach. The Namu flew back and All Might followed after it, intent on pounding it to dust. We were told the symbol of peace was weakening. Shigaraki rasped out, eyes boring into Izuku's form, but he seems stronger than in recent history. It's a miracle, Izuku responded flatly as Kurogiri opened up a portal behind the demon. Unconscious villains that were close enough to the man were tangled up in the black mist, swallowed and taken from the arena. A work of God. Those wings of yours did something. He smells just as sickeningly sweet as you do, as the rest of those children do. Shigaraki snarled low, eyes flashing around the arena as if pinpointing the children. You're like me. His wings weakly stretched out, feeble and nothing but clumps along his back. Izuku's eyebrows pinched up at that comment, hands clenching into fists at his side. His stomach dropped and he bowed his head. Truly damaged. Pay attention, asshole. Katsuki roared as he slammed a fist into Kurogiri. Izuku's eyes went wide as Kirishima skidded in front of Shigaraki, trying to hit him with his hardened arm. Shigaraki jumped out of the way, his wings fluttering uselessly as he tried to glide a safe distance. He threw himself at Kurogiri, escaping the ice that tried to creep up his feet. Izuku looked back just as Todoroki stepped up to his side, eyes dark. Todoroki's eyes took in Izuku's beaten, bloody form, his gaze moving to his wing. Are you all right? Todoroki asked, and Izuku nodded wordlessly, body swaying just the slightest bit. All Might punched the Namu through the roof of the arena just as Ida reappeared, any pro-hero available at his side. Shigaraki looked up as Kurogiri drew close, slowly wrapping his body in that black mist. We'll meet again, Izuku vowed, eyes glinting. And when we do, I'll save your corrupted soul. Shigaraki gave a twisted, choked-out cackle as the mist crawled up his chest and pulled him backwards. Corrupted soul. Watch it, hero. You'll insult someone. They were gone in the blink of an eye and Izuku's eyes flashed back to green, his body slumping down. His hands shook as he drew them up to his chest, hunching over to breathe. He stretched out his senses, feeling each one of his soulmates safe and relatively unharmed. Besides Shinsu and Aizawa, of course, Todoroki knelt down next to him, hand pressing between his wings in a comforting gesture. The heroes were rushing towards them. Recovery Girl settled on Vlad King's shoulder as he sprinted towards Shinsu. Holy crap. Kirishima wheezed out as Katsuki and him stepped in front of Izuku. Are you okay? Izuku nodded, emotions betraying him as tears streamed down his face. His entire body trembled, exhaustion and pain overriding his senses. Are you all alright? Izuku croaked out, trying to summon the energy to look up at Kirishima. Kirishima's face fell like a wet kitten and he nodded as Katsuki huffed, crossing his arms over his chest. Midoriya, my boy, are you okay? All Might's booming voice had them turning as he dashed over to the clustered boys, shirt tattered but otherwise unharmed. Here, let me carry you. All Might bent down to gather Izuku up. I'll carry him, Todoroki cut in, awkwardly shifting his feet as All Might paused. So why don't you go help with rounding up the villains? Kirishima and Katsuki stared and All Might's smile wavered. Izuku gave a tired nod and All Might sighed, standing up straight. Such friendship. All Might boomed out and was gone, gathering up unconscious bodies. What was that for? Kirishima asked as Todoroki plopped down next to Izuku. Behind, Aoyama and Uraraka were rushing towards them. Deku-kun, Uraraka cried out, coming to a stumbling halt before him. She gasped and knelt down, throwing her arms around him. We'll heal you. What the fuck? Katsuki roared and Kirishima's eyes alit with awe as Izuku's wings began glowing, humming out a song. Get off him or, whoa, we can heal you. Kirishima yelled out, eyes bright. How? By hugging you. Aoyama took Izuku's other side, leaving Todoroki's hand uncomfortably squished between the armored arm and Izuku's back. Izuku's head slumped against Aoyama's breastplate, eyes glossy. He says that physical touch from a soulmate heals him, Todoroki explained as Katsuki's palms lit up in tiny explosions. Kirishima's face broke out into a smile and he crouched down, taking Izuku's hands in his. The glowing surrounding Izuku's wigs intensified. Whoa, Kirishima burst out. Izuku's eyes fluttered as he gave a faint amused hum. This is so cool. You did good, Midoriya. It was so manly how you took on that villain and that thing by yourself. Izuku's eyes slipped close and he gave a soft smile. I protect you all, he murmured sleepily. Of course I'd protect you from evil. Kirishima opened his mouth to say more but Aoyama shook his head, raising a hand to pat Izuku's curls. Fucking babies, Katsuki grumbled, turning away with a sneer. Kirishima rolled his eyes and the other three ignored him in favor of focusing on the mending wing. Well, Uraraka breathed out, shoulders finally slumping as her adrenaline left her. We can't say UA. Doesn't pack a punch. Aoyama hummed out, smile tight. Where were you, anyways? Kirishima asked, turning to the group. I was with Bakugo in the ruins. Uraraka beamed exhaustedly and nodded to Izuku. I was with him and Tsuyu-chan in the flood area, she explained and Todoroki mumbled his area. They turned to Aoyama. He winked. It's a secret, he cooed playfully. He was with Hagakure-san in the landslide area. Izuku mumbled sleepily, eyes opening into slits. They were near the top when Todoroki-san was dealing with the villains. They stared at him, blinking. Aoyama's smile loosened just the tiniest bit, looking overly pleased with the fact Izuku knew where he had been. He uses his feathers like a sensor, Katsuki spat out, turning to glare at them when Izuku lolled off to sleep instead of answering their unspoken question. It's creepy as shit. Oh wow, Uraraka gasped out in delight. That's so cool. He really is our guardian angel. She squeezed tighter and Izuku's wings hummed louder in response to her grip. Your guardian angel, Katsuki hissed lowly to himself, eyes burning darkly as he turned his attention to the teachers. As if, Kirishima glanced back at the teen but didn't say anything, just maneuvered Izuku's hands again into a more comfortable hole. All Might and Cementos hurried over to them. The rest of the students gathered up to leave. Let's go, All Might called. We're taking him to the medic bay. They untangled from Izuku, Todoroki and Aoyama working together to get his unconscious body onto Todoroki's back. All Might surveyed the area for any remaining villains before the teachers guided the students to the exit. Izuku's wings just continued to hum and sing hymns softly, his face nuzzling into Todoroki's neck. Uraraka and Aoyama flanked him, their arms bumping the dual quirk user's elbows every so often as Kirishima talked excitedly to Cementos. Katsuki stomped next to All Might, face twisted into a scowl as All Might asked question after question about what had happened up until he came. Their wings pulsed gently in tune to Izuku's steady heartbeat, warm and comforting.